My Zoom had frozen, like the app had frozen and seemed like it was crashing right before a few minutes ago. So I'm hoping I make it through here. Is Laura the only one? Is she not on? Are we missing anyone else?
Yeah, I didn't hear from her.
Neither.
I just sent her a text, but I haven't heard anything otherwise.
Okay.
I don't see Dan either.
Oh. Me neither. Oh, it looks like he's connecting.
Okay.
So maybe I'll go ahead and get started then, if that's okay. All right, then I would like to call to order the October 5th, 2020 regular board meeting of the State College Area School District Board of Directors. If you could please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the
of the
United
United States of America and to the republic
for which it stands,
one
one
nation,
nation,
under
God,
God, indivisible, with liberty and
justice for all.
Okay, I'd like to welcome everyone who is here with us this evening. Board members with an agenda before you, are there any changes to the agenda? Okay, I talked with Dr. O'Donnell ahead of time about this, that in the interest of progressing through the agenda, we would provide public comment at the end of the evening's meeting, as well as after any action items or votes by the board, or I mean, prior to any action items or votes by the board. And at this time, Dr. O'Donnell is going to review some of the housekeeping items in regard to our virtual format.
As a result of COVID-19, this will be a virtual meeting via Zoom webinar. Nick Zepp will serve as the host of tonight's virtual meeting. The IT help desk is available during the meeting if the community encounters any technical difficulties. You may email itssupport@scasd.org or call us at 814-231-7743. A few notes for meeting participants. When board or community members want to make a comment or ask a question, please use the raise hand feature in the Zoom program accessed under the participants tab. For the public participants, there are two parts in the meeting participation, as Mrs. Concepcion mentioned, for each action item and later on the agenda during public comment section. Each person is permitted to speak for 2 minutes. The host will lower hands and mute or unmute speakers as necessary to assist with the flow of the meeting. As a result of the pandemic, all board members are participating remotely this evening. Policy 9 provides that where discretion is directly or by implication granted to the board may depart from policy. Given the extraordinary times and circumstances that we find ourselves in, the board is choosing to exercise its discretion to depart from policy 3's requirement of at least 4 board members being physically present. The format also permits community participation. The board will continue to monitor the situation and make decisions on a case-by-case basis to continue or not with meetings in this manner. The board will return to strict adherence with policy 3 as soon as possible. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. O'Donnell. At this time, I'd like to call on our board secretary for the roll call of board members.
Okay. Dr. Bader?
Here.
Ms. Bedell?
Here.
Ms. Brandt?
Here.
Ms. Concepcion?
Here.
Dr. Duffy?
Here.
Mr. Fazzard?
Here.
Mr. Hutchinson?
Here.
Mr. Leos?
Here.
Ms. Sidney?
Here.
Okay, so at this time we have time for communications on our agenda. And the first item is superintendent's update. Dr. O'Donnell, do you have communication items for us this evening?
I do. I have 2 for you. A COVID-19 update, just 3 points to make here. Employee random testing began last week. We had 15 total employees tests returned and 0 positive. Since August 26th, we've had 1 employee test positive with COVID-19. We're aware of approximately 90 additional employees who were tested either because they had symptoms or because of a reported close contact. All had tested negative. Since August 26th, we've learned of, I believe it was 4 students who've tested positive for COVID-19. That's on our dashboard. Our nurses continue to work closely with parents of students who experience any COVID-like symptoms, and we appreciate the cooperation of our families to take extra precautions as well as keeping students home. In regard to supporting elementary students and our faculty, over the last several weeks, we received feedback from parents and teachers regarding the challenges of the elementary hybrid instruction model. What we're seeing is that the dynamics are different from classroom to classroom. In some cases, delivering simultaneous instruction to in-person and remote learners is difficult, and we are working to do better with this. This is a very challenging experience, especially in our K-2 classrooms where our youngest students need the most support. Therefore, our principals and teachers have worked together to create fully remote K-2 cohorts of students where possible. What this means is that many students may be reassigned to a new class. In these instances, this will allow for the in-person teachers and fully remote teachers to focus solely on those students. This affects most K-2 classrooms, but in some cases, there will be no change at all. Through collaboration with principals, teachers, and parents, we feel this is necessary to provide the best possible learning environments under these unique circumstances. Some parents have asked why we didn't do this during the summer months before school started, and we did discuss this. That was what we were striving to do. There are several reasons, but the main reason really was the financial concern. Our concern to add the additional positions necessary to make this happen really were a big concern for us because we weren't sure if Penn State was going to be able to remain in session. And as everybody with the board knows, our finance team and our projections were with the possibility of having another $10 million decrease in revenue, not another decrease, because of the implications if Penn State was not in town physically with their student body. So that was the main reason. I know that in August when we saw University of North Carolina send its students home, we were wondering if that was going to happen to a similar size university like Penn State. And so that was really where we were at that time. And we know a lot more now, and we're trying to do better. And so that's where we are at this time. And I appreciate Vern and Deirdre and all the elementary principals and the faculty for working through this. So that's all I have at this time. If there's any questions, I know Vern and Deirdre are with us on the call. We'll be glad to answer those.
Any questions from the board? Okay, I don't see any raised hands. Oh, Lori?
Thank you. I couldn't find, anyway. I'm just wondering how the transition is going so far, how the kids are doing in, new cohorts of other students.
So Ms. Padell, at this time, we're still working through making some of those adjustments. Principals are contacting parents.
Okay.
And so there have been a couple adjustments that could have happened within an existing grade level that didn't require additional staffing. So those changes have been pretty minimal at this point. I would imagine over the next few weeks, those changes will be taking place.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, we haven't posted or began the process for bringing any additional people on board, but that'll have to return back to the board, as we work through that.
Laurel? Laurel?
Sorry.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Sorry. I'm having trouble with audio tonight. I was hoping that for our next board meeting, we could get some more detail on some things like how the class sizes are looking and teacher ratios. We've been asked that quite a bit about, some people seem to think the ratios are very different if you're in person and others think if you're remote. And I think that would be helpful along with hearing if there are more longer term intended changes to other groups of students. I was very concerned that this seems to have happened without much direct effort to reach out to parents collectively about their experiences. So we'll leave it at that.
Dan?
Yeah, it's also to follow on Laurel's comment. Laurel, I'm looking forward to learning more. I can say that we've heard from a lot of families of young children about their just concerns about the way in which we've been trying to implement a combination of in-person and remote. And I frankly, as someone who has worked in the classrooms and visited classrooms in the past, I think the whole this is incredibly challenging, particularly for these very young children in the K, first, second, and even into third and fourth grade. But I'm glad we're starting at the K1, 2 level. And I'm glad we're so responsive to the developmental needs of these kids and the requirements of what we're asking people to do at every level. You know, the staff, the teachers, that is, the students, the families. This is really challenging. So I'm glad that we're attempting to redesign things to make the process make more sense. Thank you. And thank you, Vern, for leading on this. Thank you very much.
I think to give the board an update on class sizes, I think I'd prefer to do ranges. I do not want to get into why this building and that building. Some buildings have smaller enrollments. Some buildings have higher percentage of families who want to be in person versus remote. And, you know, unless the board really wants to get into all of the spreadsheets and managing that, I don't think that would be a productive use of your time. I think giving you ranges of what we're dealing with would be my preference. We'd be there for quite a long time explaining everything and answering all the questions with how we're doing staffing and why this building has this remote numbers versus that building. We didn't make the decisions for parents.
And Dr. Duffy, I appreciate the expression of gratitude, but it's really the principals and the teachers that are engaging in the meaty conversations around, you know, how to make this work and how to make those adjustments. So thank you, but the credit really goes back to the teachers and the principals for engaging in those conversations.
Please let them know, at least that's very much appreciated. Thank you.
Will do.
Laurel?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think that when I was suggesting that we get more information, that was not with the thought that it would be decision-making on our part, but more so that the whole community could understand the larger picture and that transparency, which I do think is valuable, not because I was thinking that we would redo the work or question the work or that you had done. So I just wanted to clarify that was why I had asked for that information.
Thanks, Laurel. And as the board has seen some of the concerns from parents, the main concern that we're seeing right now is parents who don't want to see their child have to transition to another faculty member. That's pretty much from the remote families. Deirdre, at the principal level and district level, you're seeing that too, right?
That's right. That's the main question that we're getting from parents.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's understandable that this has been, the past 7 months have been so many transitions. So every time you have, you know, another one, it's daunting, but hopefully this provides some stability then.
So we're working really hard to make those transitions be pretty smooth. At Radio Park, we've had, today was the first day where first grade was able to go through that transition, and it went very, very well. And people were very appreciative of the work the teachers put in to reestablish community, and actually had some positive messages about that. And so I know it's challenging, especially in the younger grades, but it's not the only time we've done this. For example, last year at Grays Woods, there were 3 kindergarten classrooms to start the year. We realized that wasn't going to work. And like 2 to 3 months into the year, we made 4 kindergarten classrooms. And so it's not just a pandemic response, it's a response that we do when we feel like there's a need to address those situations.
That makes sense. Scott?
Yeah, just a general question, whether it's for principals or Bob or whatever, just a feel for how are the teachers holding up. We've heard some from obviously from parents and community members, both, who seem to be doing okay and who seem to be highly frustrated. What are we hearing from the teachers in general? I'm looking for specifics, just a general sense for, I know that everyone is just, working incredibly hard to do the best that they can in the situation, and just trying to get a sense for how they're holding up. Thanks.
Yeah, I'll let the rest of the team speak, but I think it's tough. The amount of communications that are on a teacher right now, not just with their students, but with their students' families is more significant than usual. Obviously teaching to students that are with you and students that are hybrid, especially the younger you go, or the needier your students, as far as implementing 504 plans, IEPs, whether they're ESL students. There's challenges at all levels, but there's no question that at the primary level, and that's where the focus is now on K2, to do this real well. And so being in and out of those classrooms and seeing that it's different. Plus they're implementing a health and safety plan that has some protocol on it, that with young kids, if you ever walk around a recess or watch young students, they're teaching them how to walk down the hall spread out. It's very different with younger kids with that plan. So Vern and Deirdre, you guys want to weigh in? Obviously Will's on the call too.
And I'll add to what Dr. O'Donnell shared. I think overwhelmingly, as I'm out in schools, I'm constantly checking in with teachers. And I think what I'm hearing from folks is they take great pride in delivering high quality learning experiences to students. And when they feel like they're trying to do that to two distinct groups of students in one learning model, they're finding and feeling like they're not able to deliver the same quality. And so that's been really hard on our teachers. And I think we've heard a desire to deliver that to one group of students, and feeling like if they were able to do that, it would be of much higher quality and the quality of which they're used to delivering.
Just to add on to what Vern has shared, our teachers have never worked harder in their lives. They really care deeply about the children and the families that they're connecting with. And it's been really hard to have the conversations to make these transitions because of the relationships. And we pride ourselves in creating these relationships with our families. And then to have this disruption is really hard on them. And they realize that long term, that's a really good decision when we think about what our students need, especially at the younger grades. But kudos to our teachers K to 12 who have, I think, never worked harder in their careers.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would just add too, and Scott, thank you for asking that. I would say at the secondary level, similar experiences for our teachers that Vern and Deirdre talked about. They're working extremely hard, but are finding it challenging managing both their in-person and remote students at the same time. So for example, today we met with the secondary ed model team just to say, we're 6 weeks into it now. Let's share some frustrations, but let's talk about some strategies that we can give teachers to help them through this, because you can't continue to do things the way you've always done it with this model. So we're going to be, I'm going to be following up with Chris Merritt tomorrow, and then we'll get something out to teachers to try and help them out, but they're working extremely hard.
Dan?
Yeah, I just quickly want to acknowledge what everybody's saying. We're at the time, typically the time of the academic year, typically when the people have the most energy for what they're doing, things are more seamless. It's far more doable, and they're now almost at the bottom in terms of the stress levels associated. It's as if it were the end of March in terms of the school year in a traditional sense of looking at it. So I just want to acknowledge the challenges and the effort that's involved to sustain at this point. And I think it's important to communicate. And I think among conversations we've had, just now, I think it's important to communicate how much the board, and I'll speak for the rest of us, appreciates the commitment people are making to this, the effort involves. This is all new territory. And even for the administration, obviously, and for a board as well. So just want to express our support and appreciation for the effort and the commitment that people are giving to this right now. Thank you.
Thank you. So then moving on to the next item on the agenda, we have the legislative update. David and Lori, are there any legislative items?
I don't have anything new to share.
Just one brief item. One bill that we were very concerned about, the House Bill 2696, which would establish education savings accounts, which is the latest version of school vouchers, was pulled in committee. That doesn't mean it's dead. It just means it's not on track at the moment. So that's encouraging news.
And I've seen a lot of PSBA communication about concerns over that bill. So, Amy?
Sorry, I was trying to pull up the House bill name. One of our teachers actually just shared that Senate Bill 1216, she wrote, has passed in the House and is being it's a bill that's already passed in the House and it's being voted on with amendments in the Senate, and it's regarding Keystone exams. And if passed, they would create some exemptions over this past year, which we know, with COVID and a variety of other issues, may be some concerns about Keystone exams. So I know that's often an interest of parents. So if they want to support that bill, it's Senate Bill 1216. I heard that through a teacher. So I just thought I'd share that real quick.
Thank you. Okay. Gretchen, do you have an update from the COG?
Yes. In the last COG meeting, they discussed trick or treat night. And I thought I would bring that up because I think a lot of families are interested in hearing about that. And first, the trick or treat night got changed to October 29th with a rain date of November 1st. And there was a lot of discussion about, is it safe, and will it be not as safe on October 29th as it might look now, and how would that work? There was a consensus to go ahead and pick a date so that the different municipalities would not all choose different dates, although Half Moon always kind of does its own thing. And I believe October 18th-ish, a decision will be made to go ahead and proceed with that as an official trick-or-treat night, October 29th, or something else. And the consensus was that there would be ample information to communicate CDC safety guidelines, and that it would be good to go ahead and pick an official date, because people are going to want to trick or treat whether it's officially allowed or not. And so just to try to make it as safe as possible. So October 29th, rain date November 1st. And also I heard from the chair of the COG Safety Committee that they would in the future like to have SCASD represented on that committee, on the safety committee. And so that next meeting I will attend as the COG liaison from SCASD. And the last thing is that there's a new executive director of the COG, and his name is Eric Nuremberg. And I've never met him in person because of the timing of the pandemic. And so I will meet him on Friday. And I know that the board is scheduled to tour Memorial Field almost at the same time that I'm scheduled to meet with him. So I thought we might want to invite him to come with us as a neighborly gesture. So I'll check in with Ed and Randy about that. So that is all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other items from the board for communications? Okay.
Amber?
Jim.
I'm sorry. I didn't get the raise the hand button. I pinch hit for Gretchen the other day with Peter Buck, and we presented on our version of the solar power purchasing agreement and how we put together the cohort. And I thought it went pretty well. It was to similarly situated group of governments in sort of the East Coast and Central Coast of the U.S. that are thinking about putting similar things together. I thought it went well, and Pam Adams did a terrific job putting the slides together for it.
It's fantastic. Thank you.
Amber, I forgot one other thing. I'm sorry, which is that Peter Buck, it reminded me when Jim said that, and a couple of his students presented at the facilities meeting this week on a greenhouse gas inventory that they had begun, and what their findings were, and then also recommendations for the future for how to create targets to reduce SCASD greenhouse gas emissions. And the report is available online from that meeting's agenda, and then also their presentation was emailed to the board. So it was really interesting, and I encourage anybody who hasn't seen it yet to go ahead and check it out. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Okay, any other board communication items? Okay, then at this time, I would like to request a motion to approve the routine approval listing as presented on the agenda.
Duffy, so moved.
Leah's second.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Are there any questions about routine approvals? Okay, then we'll have a roll call vote.
Mr. Leos,
Yes.
Ms. Sidney,
Yes.
Dr. Bader,
Yes.
Ms. Bedell,
Yes.
Ms. Brandt,
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion,
Yes.
Dr. Duffy,
Yes.
Mr. Fazard,
Yes.
Mr. Hutchinson.
Yes.
Okay, so that item has passed. The first item under action is a motion to approve the Memorial Field furniture, fixtures, and equipment. This is shown in attachment 6A.
So moved, Duffy.
Dell second.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Are there any questions on this item? Okay. Is there any public comment on this item? Okay, then seeing none, we'll have a roll call vote.
Ms. Sidney,
Yes.
Dr. Bader,
Yes.
Ms. Bedell,
Yes.
Ms. Brandt,
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion,
Yes.
Dr. Duffy,
Yes.
Mr. Fazard,
Yes.
Mr. Hutchinson,
Yes.
Mr. Leos.
Yes.
Okay, that item is passed. Item B under action is a motion to approve Memorial Field change orders as shown in attachment 6B.
Leah, so moved.
Bedell second.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Any board member questions on this item? Or discussion, Jim?
Yeah, Ed, I had a question about, well, two things. So that was for an addition of AEDs. How many AEDs do we have in the field?
So the AED approval was on the routine approval item.
Oh, I'm
And
sorry.
that's okay. That's
Yeah.
okay. And it's
Okay.
just it's a single AED for the stadium itself. So that AED would be, with the trainer, and just be situated for use during events and games.
Okay, and also we do have medical professionals at the game, so.
Yeah.
Okay, great. And then the other one was, do we have an occupancy permit? We good to
do.
go?
We
Good.
do.
Congratulations.
We have a temporary certificate of occupancy. It's currently for a reduced capacity, not related to COVID, but we're also dealing with the COVID reduced capacity. So the two are kind of hand in hand right now, both limiting our degree of occupancy to the stadium. I expect within the next several weeks we'll have full capacity occupancy permit. But of course, at that point, I would fully also expect that we would not be able to load the stadium due to COVID. So on paper, we'll have complete occupancy here in a couple weeks. But we do have we do have occupancy up to 400 at this point.
Okay.
Thanks and well done.
Thanks.
Scott?
Yeah, and as kind of normal when I see these document issues, are these items that were unforeseen and we would have paid for otherwise, or did they kind of create an additional cost to the district as a result of the issues? And follow-up question on that, on PCO3 on the expansion tank. With that being originally considered to be suspended off of the ground, and now, if I understand it, required to be floor mounted, does that change anything else with whatever is in that space, since we now are taking up floor space with a hot water expansion tank that was otherwise in the air?
Yeah, I think that was partially to correct the initial problem. So it's a reverse of what you're seeing, Scott, was that the original design created space conflicts in addition to sizing conflicts. So this corrected both of those. Regarding your first question, we do have several change order exposures that we are evaluating, that I believe the district, while they are an exposure to the school district, I also believe there's some design issues that the district shouldn't be held responsible for. I'll be reporting on some of those in the future. That doesn't relate to these two specifically, but we do have some of those we will be discussing in future meetings.
Thanks.
Okay, any other questions on this item? Is there any public comment on the item? Okay, then we'll have a roll call vote.
Dr. Bader,
Yes.
Ms. Bedell,
Yes.
Ms. Brandt,
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion,
Yes.
Dr. Duffy,
Yes.
Mr. Fazard,
Yes.
Mr. Hutchinson,
Yes.
Mr. Leos,
Yes.
Ms. Zidney.
Yes.
Okay, that item has passed. The next item, item C, it's a motion to approve playground project change orders, and this is shown in attachment 6C.
Leah so moved.
Duffy second.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Any questions? Laurel.
Yeah, thanks. With this change order and also the announcement earlier this week about the change about recess and how the playgrounds are being used, could you just fill us in, Ed, are we, other than this surrounding this dirt pile that the change order regards, are the playgrounds, the new playgrounds in and kids playing on them within the confines that we've put on recess?
Yes, the playgrounds themselves are open and being used by students. We do have we have two small issues, one with the sliding board apparatus at Coral Street, and the other with one of the pieces of equipment at Radio Park, both of which had replacement parts that need to be ordered. Those are available, but because we're so anxious to get the kids onto the playgrounds, we've chosen to open the playgrounds minus one piece at each playground, as opposed to letting the contractor come back and work on installation. So we scheduled those finish up installations for October 29 and 30 on those school days, so that we could have the playgrounds open, have them being used, minus one component in each scenario. As far as progress, I think we're in good shape. Have that ability to use them, and should see this month, a complete open with those other two pieces being completed.
That's
Laurel-
fantastic.
Laurel,
Thank
the kids love them.
Yeah.
I'm out every day. They are so excited to be on the playground. So thanks to the school board for your support of the playground. The children are just absolutely loving having that equipment to play on, especially at Radio Park. They haven't had playground equipment for 3 years, so they're very excited.
And
Yeah, and I think this type turns out to be, under the pandemic conditions, an ideal kind of playground, and even more ideal kind of playground to have than some big, some of the things that other places have put in that are these nice, compact, very exciting, maybe looking, but have children practically on top of each other. This really turns out to have been a good move.
Mhm. I did have a question about the dirt stockpile, and I'm sorry if I just missed something before. Is that something that is being saved for future landscaping needs?
Yeah, this is a change order in the past tense. So that dirt stockpile has been moved and used. We needed to have a temporary fence around it at one point in the project. That we authorized that as a field directive, and we're bringing you the change order in that as a post approval.
Okay. Dan?
Yeah, I wanted to just mention that when we received an email earlier this week, or in the last several days, about the decision to provide access to the playgrounds. Occasionally, even for someone as old as me, it really brings back the memory of being a kid and wanting to play, wanting to run, and the pictures of those kids. And I'm not sure, I suppose they were our kids climbing up the rope ladder. It just reminded me of how good it feels when you're that young and at that age to really have that opportunity to really stretch yourself and to really get involved. And, and I could see over time as they were watching those facilities being built or being available, that they weren't able to get on them yet, how exciting it must have been when they were given the opportunity. And I'm just so excited that we could really enrich the lives of these kids in this way. Thank you.
Thanks. Any other questions from the board? Is there any public comment on this item? Virginia Squire, I see your hand raised. If you would like to speak, if you could just introduce yourself, and then you'd have 2 minutes.
Hello, I'm Virginia Squire. I was a teacher at Delta Middle School. I just wanted to ask about the plan for the Delta playground, because I had groups of students who worked with Vernon on the playground plan. So since this came up, I'd like to know when Delta is getting their playground. They haven't had one for years. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for the question. I think we have a playground master plan for the district, and that's probably something we'll be revisiting over time as funds are available for those projects. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Then we will go ahead and have a roll call vote.
Ms. Bedell,
Yes.
Ms. Brandt,
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion,
Yes.
Dr. Duffy,
Yes.
Mr. Fazzard,
Yes.
Mr. Hutchinson,
Yes.
Mr. Leos,
Yes.
Ms. Zidney,
Yes.
Dr. Bader.
Yes.
Okay, that item is passed. The next item, item D, is a motion to approve the Park Forest Middle School crosswalk, and this is shown in attachment 6D.
Bizarre, so moved.
Duffy, second.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Board member questions on this item? I had reached out earlier to Ed and Randy and asked about the bids from that we've had several prior bids.
Yeah, if you like, I'll give a little bit of a recap here. We've had a unusual, at least unusual for us, bidding scenario with this playground, and a lot of it has been tied to the fact that this is a PennDOT project as opposed to while the State College Area School District is involved in preparing and awarding the bids, it really is a PennDOT project. And they have a particular set of rules that we do not have. There are rules around having a bidder needs to be pre-qualified, and they have to confuse the matter even more, they have a variety of pre-qualification categories. So a bidder can be pre-qualified to do certain PennDOT work, but not pre-qualified to do other PennDOT work, which it was news to me, but I've learned about as we've worked our way through this bidding scenario. So way back in June, and we had our first round of bids for this project, and we actually had two legitimate pre-qualified bidders, there are a few errors in pulling this memo together. I apologize for the memo that you're seeing today, but back in June 15th, our low bidder was a bidder named Landserv was at $120,000, and Wyoming Electric and Signal was at $134,000, and we had only had a grant for $89,000 for that work. The shortfall from the grant money to the low bid was $35,000, and based on a discussion at that board meeting, you rejected those bids, and we rebid the project with a reduced scope to go to a manual operation on the crosswalk as opposed to a detection system. We expected that the bids would become way down, and they did with our second bid, and which came in at $51,000. That's the pieces missing from this memo that you see this evening. The problem with that $51,000 bid, which is about where we thought the project should be in terms of price, was that that particular bidder did not have the proper pre-qualification in place, so we had to reject that bid. This is the third round of the bid, again at the reduced scope to a manual operation, and we have a new issue where we had a low bidder around the amount we expected, even less than we expected at $41,000, but again did not have the proper pre-qualifications in place. And our Wyoming Electric, who is pre-qualified, came in at $105,000, which was nearly $30,000 less than their bid in the first round, which is verifying that they did acknowledge the reduce the scope by $30,000, but still far exceeded the grant money. With the grant money being at $89,000 plus change, we would need to fund an additional $16,346. Randy has kind of helped with some of this. Randy's had some discussions with Patton Township. Patton Township is considering helping defray some of this cost. We don't have a firm commitment at this point. So the way we're going to portray this is at most, we'd be looking at a $16,000 additional expenditure, but it could be less if Patton Township would potentially help funding this shortfall, because it has been a joint effort with the township and the school district to get this crosswalk addressed. So our options this evening are to accept the bid, and get the project started and come up with the additional funding, or to reject the bids and either walk away from the project or rebid. The problem with rebidding is that you really never know what you're going to get. You hope for and you try to get it the situation better, but sometimes that doesn't happen. So considering this is our third round, considering the fact that we would like to see a crosswalk there, and while it's $16,000 is a fair amount of money compared to the cost of the project, we'd be getting nearly $90,000 in a grant, for the rest of it. So our recommendation was to accept this bid, but certainly open for discussion and help you with any of your decision-making process here.
Okay. Any questions from board members? Gretchen?
Yeah, thanks, Ed. I'm feeling a little confused.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, I don't think it's in the current memo what the original bid was with the sensors. That must have been in the previous
That is
memo.
that is on the second page of this memo.
Oh, it's here. Okay.
Yeah, it's the second page of the memo. It's in italics, and the original bid with the original scope, Wyoming Electric and Signal bid 134,927, Landserv Incorporated bid 124,888.
Okay.
So that was the original bid. What's missing is the middle bid. We've got I have the current bid for you. I have the original bid for you. Somehow, when I was pulling these three together, I missed the middle bid.
Okay, so I guess what I'm wondering is, since in this last round, the amount was higher than anticipated, what's the cost difference between the old bid that had the sensors and the current bid without the sensors?
So there's two ways to look at it. One is if you compare Wyoming Electric's bid with the sensors and Wyoming's electric bid without the sensors, being single contractor, there's a $30,000 difference there. The piece that if you compare the Landserv bid, it's a $20,000 difference, but Landserv is no longer interested in the project. So it's really not consequential to even talk about their original bid, because I spoke with Landserv prior to this bid, and they were not interested in rebidding. So that Landserv bid is gone. So the real comparison here is Wyoming Electric before, Wyoming Electric after. So it's 134 compared to 105. So it's nearly a $30,000 difference.
And then in terms of working with Patton Township, what my input would be is that if that simply hasn't had time to be explored, then we wouldn't want to sacrifice the safer route with the sensors just because we want to get this bid accepted and dealt with soon. That we've been dealing with this for a few years now, I think. And so just in terms of the lifespan of the traffic light, and the fact that this particular location of this crosswalk is used by not only the school district, but also that entire Park Forest and Park Hills community to go to Circleville Park. And most recently in the past year or so, it's just had a huge influx of hikers in the Scotia Barron area over where all those trails are. And so because of the foot traffic having increased so much, I just wonder if, and with this possibility now that Patton Township is willing to, maybe chip in, that we might want to think more long-term in terms of the increase in foot traffic there and bicycle traffic as well. I know SCASD PE classes go over there on bikes as well. So anyway, I'm not sure what those negotiations would potentially be in terms of cost, but it seems like because it's so well traveled and will increase due to all of the hiking that has been becoming much more popular in the past year or so, if that is something that SCASD might want to take into consideration before deciding on how to proceed with this bid. So thank you, Ed.
Yeah, I understand your thoughts, Gretchen, and I apologize that this is so convoluted at this point. But the thing I'd like to, what I maybe didn't point out well enough is that there's no option to go back to the 134. The option at that point, which is an option, would be to reject these bids and go out for a fourth round of bidding and hope, and redoing the scope back to the original scope, and hope that Wyoming would come in, or somebody would come in with a bid similar on the first round. And that could very well happen. It could be less, it could be more. I just, the bidding on this has been so crazy. You're really rolling the dice. So I think.
I guess I do understand that fully, but with this possibility of working collaboratively with Patton Township, it seems like it would potentially be worth rolling the dice. And then if it doesn't pan out, then it doesn't pan out. If it did, it could potentially save a life or a limb or several lives or limbs. So it's really a safety issue, but is it worth rolling the dice? That's a good question.
And is our only option right now to accept or reject the bids? Is there any way to pause while taking a chance to talk to Patton Township?
I guess you probably could delay you could delay a bid till, delay a decision till October 19, but it's not like, and Randy talked to Patton, but I think that it'll be hard to get to Patton to commit to a concept of, well, how much would you reimburse, based on some number we don't know yet. I think his discussion was based on this number that we know today, and not a potential rebid number. Randy, maybe you can help with any.
No, that's absolutely correct. I said that our cost differential right now that we know is approximately $16,000, and would you be willing to share in that cost to get the project completed, understanding our bidding difficulties that we've had over the last couple of months. And they said that, I talked to the manager there, and he said that he would get back to me. I told him that we were presenting this to the board this evening, as this would be our maximum exposure for the district, and that if Patton is able to share along, then our exposure would be decreased. But I made no mention of another bid potential because we don't have any out on the table.
To follow up on that question, then is something like adding a thermal sensor beyond the scope of what you could do as a change order?
My guess is, just based on my experience with change orders versus bids, we'd be pushing the project back up over the 134. But I don't have any good sense of by how much. I just don't know.
Scott?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that I understand. So, the crosswalk is bid to go in. There will be a light there. The only question is whether you have to press a button, which you do at every other corner and intersection, or whether it's an automatic sensor that you don't have to press a button. So, the only safety consideration is, does somebody forget to press the button and keep walking versus, the thermal sensor or whatever it is automatically picking them up if they're standing within whatever the proximity is, of that sensor. So I just want to make sure that my assumption on that is correct. And if that's the case, then, I'm just not sure how much of a safety consideration this is, because we are putting in a crosswalk that will have the light. It's really if somebody forgets to press the button and starts walking. So again, I just want to make sure I'm right in how I'm looking at that.
Yeah, you're correct, Scott. And the only correction I would make is it's not a traffic signal. Your comment made it almost sound like you were maybe thinking it was a traffic signal when you said a light. It is a flashing warning, pedestrian crossing.
Got it.
Okay. All right. So I think we probably understand the scope of our options then. Any other board member questions? Okay. Any public comment? I see Ari's hand raised. Ari, did you want to speak about the crosswalk? Maybe that might have been an accident. Okay. Then we will, oh, I see Ari. Okay. Ari, if you'd like to
Hi.
unmute.
So I was at Park Forest Middle School when I was like in like 7th grade, but I'm kind of like wondering, why are we doing the crosswalk now and thinking about the crosswalk now when, look, it's COVID time and we don't have a lot of time to get the costs prepared and all of this because it's COVID time. I don't know if you understand what I mean, but please, if we consider it for like next year or a couple more years until like 2024 or something, when the COVID is gone.
Thank you, Ari. I think the answer to that question for anyone who's watching is there's a whole project being done along Valley Vista with putting bike paths in. And so this aligns well with work that's already being done by the township.
And the signal that is there is no longer working.
Broken, right. Okay. Any other board member questions? Okay, we'll have a roll call vote. Oh, I'm sorry, Gretchen.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention in terms of the safety issue, just looking at this quickly, the reason that the sensors are safer is because oftentimes pedestrians will push the button, not have the patience, and then go. And that's why there's a greater number of pedestrian deaths with the push button kind of traffic signal rather than the sensor. And there have been studies that show this, that it actually does save lives. So I just wanted to point that out before we vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Kyle?
Yeah, I just had one quick question, which is that you just referenced how people are more likely to, like, if there's a push button, just push the button and then get impatient and jaywalk. But how would the thermal sensor, like, unless I'm misunderstanding how this is working, which I might be, how would a thermal sensor avoid that? Because I assume at least that the thermal sensor wouldn't just give you the green light right away. Like, or would it? Like, I guess I'm just asking, is there a point in spending the extra money on the thermal sensor if most people, like, if you're gonna have to wait anyway? It's just my question.
I don't think you don't wait for it to flash, right? And it starts flashing right away when you push the button, right?
Right. This is a little different than the traffic light because we're not dealing with a red light, green light scenario where you're pushing a button and waiting. This is similar to the flashing beacons we had at the high school prior to the current project. We put them in within the last year or two of operating the high school, where you push the button and it just starts flashing the warning, pedestrian warning. So there's no waiting for a green light. I think what this is just guarding against people just not pushing the button and darting out or running. But so that's the concern here.
All right, thank you.
Okay, then I think we'll have a roll call vote.
Ms. Brandt,
No.
Ms. Concepcion,
Yes.
Dr. Duffy,
Yes.
Mr. Fazzard,
Yes.
Mr. Hutchinson,
Yes.
Mr. Leos,
Yes.
Ms. Sidney,
Yes.
Dr. Bader,
Yes.
Ms. Bedell.
Yes.
Okay, so that item has passed. Item E is a motion to approve the adoption of IB Economics textbooks for 2020-2021 school year, and that is shown in attachment 6E.
Duffy, so moved.
Dell, second.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Any questions on this item? Any public I'm sorry, Jim?
On mute. So the reason we put this one off is because this was a recently revised curriculum. Are we teaching it now?
We are.
Okay. So what are the students using the old books or do we already?
We don't have old books. So the teacher is teaching concepts from IB, but he just doesn't have the official book yet.
Okay. And do they, so we're buying the textbooks and the digital version, right?
One digital license.
Okay.
Yep. We're just getting one class set of books and one digital license.
Okay, and how many students are enrolled now? About how big is that?
I believe there's one section running each semester of IB economics. I believe so. I'd have to double check that, but I think that's my recollection.
Thank you.
Kyle, I see your hand raised.
I just want to ask, like I'm taking IB Econ this fall, and my question was just like, we have a textbook. I don't think it's an official IB textbook.
Right, right.
Is what this would do replace the one we're using now with the IB book?
It can replace it or it can be in conjunction with it. So IB textbooks are specifically designed to help students with the external assessments.
Okay.
And
So
so
then that would
helps,
go in,
yeah,
that would
just
go into effect immediately then?
Yep, it would.
All right, sounds good. Thank you. I'd love to change textbooks, so.
Yep. Yep.
Okay. Any other board questions? Any public comment?
I'm sorry, there are 2 full sections each semester for IB Econ. Sorry about that.
Great. Okay, seeing no public comment, then we'll have a roll call vote.
Ms. Concepcion,
Yes.
Dr. Duffy,
Yes.
Mr. Fazzard,
Yes.
Mr. Hutchinson,
Yes.
Mr. Leos,
Yes.
Ms. Sidney,
Yes.
Dr. Bader,
Yes.
Ms. Bedell,
Yes.
Ms. Brandt.
Yes.
Okay, that item has passed. Item F is a motion to approve an agreement with Mount Nittany Medical Center for employee testing services, and this is shown in attachment 6F.
Lee is so moved.
Duffy second.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Any questions on this, Scott?
Yeah, I guess my only question on this is whether we did any, I just don't know whether 108 is a market rate or not for what would be, I'm assuming, a cash price for a COVID test, because we would be paying this directly through the district, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
So that's my only question, is I just didn't know whether that was a market rate, because we're really talking about 50 per week. Is it up to 50 or is it 50?
We are requesting 50 tests per week.
Okay, so 5,000 plus a week. Yeah, that's my only question. I have no idea what the cash price would be for a COVID test.
My understanding is that this is a market price, and getting a hold of this type of an arrangement this quickly we were very fortunate to have Mount Nittany join with us. And there was not any other members of the market that I'm aware of that were willing and able to take this on for us at this time. I also don't have any reason to believe that, I don't know I can't speak of their pricing structure, but I do not have reason to believe that they are, for lack of a better term, making bank on this transaction on behalf of the school district.
Yep, and certainly don't want anybody, wasn't implying anything like that, just had no idea what the market price was. So thanks, that's what I needed.
Kyle, I see your hand raised.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to ask whether there's any plan. I know this covers 50 employee tests a week. I was just going to ask whether there's any plan to do random screening of students as well, because it seems like since students are the ones intermingling more and teachers generally have, it seems like, a decent buffer of protection most of the time. And since younger people are more likely to be asymptomatic and so not go get a test on their own accord, it seems like it might be that you could detect an outbreak earlier if you test students randomly as well as employees. So I was just asking if there's any plan to put random student screening testing into place too.
Not at this point in time. That randoms testing with students brings about another layer of challenges, and we have not had that opportunity to explore that yet.
Thank you.
Kyle, as minors,
Yeah.
I think it's a little more complex about privacy and volunteerism. It's not the same as the screening that they can do at the universities, because the majority of those students are of legal age to be independent adults. So
Okay. Because I doubt many parents would say, no, my kid can't get a COVID test. But
I don't,
yeah.
I would want to do that, but everybody has independent reasons for decision making. So yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Any other questions, Dan? I thought I saw your hand up, but.
No, I'm okay. Thank you. You answered it.
Okay, great. Any further board member questions? Any public comment on this item? Okay, we'll have a roll call vote then.
Dr. Duffy,
Yes.
Mr. Fazard,
Yes.
Mr. Hutchinson,
Yes.
Mr. Leos,
Yes.
Ms. Sidney,
Yes.
Dr. Bader,
Yes.
Ms. Bedell,
Yes.
Ms. Brandt,
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion.
Yes. Okay, so that item has passed. Item G is a motion to approve the MOU with the State College Area Education Association for online learning, and this is shown in attachment 6G.
Leah so moved.
Lazard second.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Any questions or discussion? Any public comment? Okay, we'll have a roll call vote then.
Mr. Fazard,
Yes.
Mr. Hutchinson,
Yes.
Mr. Leos,
Yes.
Ms. Sidney,
Yes.
Dr. Bader,
Yes.
Ms. Bedell,
Yes.
Ms. Brandt,
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion,
Yes.
Dr. Duffy.
Yes.
Okay, so that item has passed then.
Amber?
Yes,
I'd just like to thank the association and Linda in your office for getting that done. That's a great accomplishment. I know we're facing difficult times, and I know that a virtual academy agreement is all the much more relevant at the times that we're in. So I appreciate you guys taking the time to put that together.
Agreed.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Okay, under information discussion, item A under student learning is the board resolution on anti-racism that we've been working on. So I'd like to call on Dr. O'Donnell and Dr. Chatters to provide an overview on this item.
Sure. What we have, we recapped in the memo, basically the process for the different voices that are reflected in what's been designed. The discussion in the summer at the board CCL meeting kicked off the conversations that occurred. Obviously, there's been a lot of discussion with the board through committee work session time recently as well. And so we've been pretty thorough with that. We've had student panelists with us for multiple meetings. And, so I think, understanding any of the feedback, I think that's already occurred. I think the voice of all the different people who were able to attend those meetings is accounted for. And I'll ask Saria to share any other reflections at this time. I think there's no doubt with where we are as a community and a school community, even beyond. I think the intent was to really spend time and listen to people, especially with what they're going through, and what their thinking is in regard to the school district. This obviously was not a process that involved all of our PTOs and was not as wide ranging, but I do think it is very, very well informed and developed with the voice in mind that came through those listening sessions. Saria, is that pretty accurate?
Yes.
Okay.
And I know that there was just a couple of questions just about, which we put in the original memo from the Wednesday board work session, just about the number of places that the resolution was sent for feedback.
sent for, to get information, and also the individuals that attended various work sessions that were representing larger groups, such as, for example, the NAACP, the Asian Pacific Islander Governor's Council, Nalini Krishnakutty attended, many different individuals from many different groups. In addition to that, all of our work groups, and the resolution has gone far and wide, especially working to get to and get the information from marginalized communities. And so I just wanted to make sure that I put that information out there as well. And any questions?
Thank you, Dr. Chatters. Any questions from board members or discussion points at this time? Lori.
I don't have a question, but I do want to express thanks to everybody who was involved in this. And I think in particular, I want to thank Dr. Chatters and Dr. Bader, because first of all, we would not have a document of this quality without Dr. Chatters. Her expertise, her vision, her work with our students. I mean, listening to these students, it's so clear to me that they have been in really good hands with Dr. Chatters. Her connections in the community, all of these things, her presence really opened doors, I think, to smart, honest conversations and really good input. And then in terms of Dr. Bader's contributions, she attended all of these meetings. She took copious notes, and she worked with Dr. Chatters to really craft, I think, a document that is rich and specific and does, I think, a beautiful job of building on what our district has done and giving us a great vision for where to go, and also in providing tremendous support to the people in this district, teachers and students and administrators who are already working really hard to do this work. So I just wanted to say that there was a really Herculean effort on the part of a couple of people, and I just wanted to acknowledge that. I think it's important. Thanks.
Thank you. Kyle Hines, I see your hand raised.
Thanks. I just want to kind of echo what Ms. Bedell just said, which is that at least from my point of view as a high school student, high school students right now are overwhelmingly angry with what's going on, angry with all the different layers of the system that we have that screws things up for minorities and for people of color. And I think that this resolution went through a ton of steps that were really, really important to get feedback at every imaginable step. And just speaking on behalf of what high schoolers I think that I can say that we absolutely would support this. So yeah, thank you so much to everyone who spent the time to go through the process and put this together, because it really is excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Kyle. Gretchen?
I also wanted to kind of echo Lori's remarks and really am aware of, as Lori said, the Herculean effort that this has taken over several months now. And again, wanting to thank Dr. Chatters, Dr. Bader, Ms. Bedell, and especially the students who have participated throughout the process. I have been blown away by their input and their maturity at that age that I only wish I could have had. I mean, I've been so impressed, and all of the groups that participated in these conversations. And I also sort of wanted to ditto Lori's remarks about how important it is that the resolution is rich and specific in its language, and how meaningful that is to all of the people who were involved in creating the resolution, all of the people who attended those meetings, and the students who worked really hard at putting this together and gave a lot of time and energy. Thank you to all of the people who ended up putting this together. Thank you.
Thanks, Gretchen. Dan?
Hi, Amber. Yeah, I want to just, I was in a separate conversation today. There was a question raised about the origins of the second paragraph in relation to the content of the direction given to the resolution. And since the resolution addresses systemic racism, in other words, a broad-based, ongoing, multifaceted, endemic experience of racism in the country that goes back a long time. And while it certainly includes the events revolving around slavery, there are a number of other ways in which we, as a nation, have enslaved individuals or deprived them of their freedom, or in one way or the other, co-opted their property or their lands. So the point behind the second paragraph had to do with acknowledging that this is a larger way in which the majority, certainly the white majority, has had its way, if you will, with the less powerful individuals. So that was the origin for the second paragraph, and providing a broader, more historical view of the process that we're trying to recognize and essentially reassess its influence in the way in which we make conscious and unconscious decisions. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. I think that's important in terms of pointing out part of the purpose of this resolution is in terms of recognizing and acknowledging some of the impact of history on populations that include students in our district. And as our district's trying to work more towards trauma-informed practices in terms of how we are taking care of the social and emotional development of students, that we are simply, acknowledging we're aware that there's long-term historical impacts that have had an impact on marginalized populations that are part of our community. Gretchen, do I see your hand raised again?
Sorry, I forgot to lower it.
Oh, okay. Okay. Jim. Oops, I think you're still on mute.
I just said, am I unmuted? Of course, you couldn't hear me.
Yeah.
We had a couple of questions about who this resolution is intended for. What's the audience of a board resolution? And, as some have said before, sometimes the audience is a legislature when we're talking about charter school funding, or the governor or the board of education, the education department at the state level. But this really is our community is the audience for this, and I think it's sort of fourfold. It's, for our faculty to let them know that we support them in these efforts, and particularly the ones who are already doing it. We know there's quite a few faculty that are already teaching this and having these hard discussions in class, and we want them to know that we have their back. It's for the administrators and our curriculum directors to let them know that the curricular changes that we've made in social studies, academic literacy, and so on are heading in the right direction. Obviously we're not there yet, but this is for them to let them know that this is the right direction. And it's for our students to know that this is a safe place to have these discussions, that we can have these discussions, that we recognize the history of endemic racism and some, we acknowledge that our history, and we acknowledge how there are inert and overt biases in our community. And we want to let our students know that this is a State College School District is a safe place to have the discussions. And then finally, it's for our community to acknowledge that it's not enough just to be tolerant. We actually have to work at being anti-racist, and that's why we're making this resolution. And some have questioned my comments about language in this resolution at the work session, in the past work session. And I think that board resolutions have to be understandable, because otherwise we lose the audience that want to preserve the status quo or don't necessarily agree with us. And so I think if you make it readable and understandable, that's why I think that the language as we currently have it has a little bit of, is a little jargony, and I would like to see it. And my comments were to the point that I would like to see it, that some of that come out of there, because we can make those points in more plain language, more readable language, and more understandable language to people that don't necessarily agree with us. Thanks.
Jim, I think it would help to understand like which particular pieces of wording are of concern in terms of being.
Well, one example that stands out to me is the word otherism.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, you know, I think that can be easily, you know, I know what it means, right? But I think it can be easily explained as, you know, exclusionary language or exclusionary behavior, without having to use a term that a lot of the people that don't agree with this resolution or want to preserve the status quo, you know, they'll minimize our resolution because they don't necessarily agree with it. And I think the more understandable we can make it, the better. So I understand what otherism means, but I think you could say it in a little bit more plain language.
If it's okay, I'll just read out loud that sentence so that we're all on the same page. It's at the end of the fourth paragraph. Actually, I'll read the paragraph real quick, just to make sure it's in context. We all have the context. The paragraph says, whereas we are troubled and concerned about the recent increase in hateful rhetoric and acts of bias directed against those with actual or perceived origins in Asian, Latinx, and African countries. Their safety, like the safety of all in our community, is a fundamental priority. We recognize that language that dehumanizes and otherizes is an infringement on an individual's ability to live freely and with the sense of safety necessary to a strong educational environment. So that's the sentence. This is in, I guess my sense as in reading this is that because otherizes is paired with dehumanizes, that it's sort of more understandable in context, because it's paired with the word, it dehumanizes and otherizes, because those words are set together, helps it be more clear what the intent is there. And then having the hot link there with on that word also it links to a definition. It's the first time I encountered the word other as being used as a verb, like to otherize someone or to treat someone as an other. Was probably in reading law review articles in the realm of human rights law 20 years ago, as well as articles on sectarian divisions, primarily in the post-Soviet republics, when there was sort of a breakdown of previous, like sort of the glue that had held those societies together with the fall of the Soviet Union, and a lot of the studies on how sectarian divisions became really problematic. Like you would see words like that in those contexts in terms of studies of places that had experienced significant sectarian divisions, and that to otherize would be, the intent of that word would be sort of very specific. And I'm not sure if excludes has the same meaning as otherize, because it's really it's really a specific kind of dynamic in which one group is treating another group within society that has less power as if they are inherently different or inherently not part of the body politic in the same way. So that I guess is my sense of why that word itself is valuable. I'm not personally, whether we use this word or not, I think that the intent can be communicated, but I think my understanding is that this came to be in the document through input from community groups. So, okay, with that, I'll let Dan, I see your hand raised.
Yeah, thanks, Amber. This is like a recording from last Wednesday. We had the same comments and the same discussion. I want to thank Jim for stepping up. Frankly, I'm still a new board member. This is only the beginning of my second term, my 5th year. And one of the things I'm realizing in this experience is that you put your best effort at trying to move the dial on something, and then nothing essentially appears to change. And there's a sense of like, well, what's the point? Well, how is it worth bringing a question ahead again? And Jim did offered a great supplemental explanation to what we talked about last week in terms of being inclusive in our efforts to write about this proposal that we have, this resolution that we have. And Amber, you are amazing in so many ways, and you're also amazing in terms of your capacity to inform us about your experience in school and the meaning of the term. The thing is, it took a long time to really to get to the meaning of this term. And if it takes that long, think about the person who encounters it in text and is trying to make sense of it. And that's my basic point. There's got to be another way we can shrink, in a sense, colloquialize the meaning of a term like that, so that people can easily grasp it and it doesn't represent a barrier, which was my point last Wednesday in terms of all this. And I don't want to dig a hole for any of this in going back to the discussion we had either Wednesday or the previous CCL meeting, but I think that we need to focus on the audience for this. And yes, it is about those who are harmed and who are suffering as a result of these forces, but we also need to involve the whole community in recognizing the needs of those individuals. And one of the ways we can do that is through vocabulary. So I just thought I'd mention that again. Thank you.
Kyle?
This might be a small quibble with the wording. It's in the same paragraph as the othering thing, and I'm not sure if it's too late to change something like that, where it just says, we are troubled and concerned about the recent increase in hateful rhetoric and acts of bias directed against those with actual or perceived origins in Asian, Latinx, and African countries. I was just wondering if it might be more accurate to say like Asian, Latin American, and African countries, just because it's talking about the countries. It's talking about the countries and not the people. And Latin America is like the region that we're talking about. So I'm just curious if it would be too late in the game to make a change like that or something. It just kind of stuck out to me as something that might be like better fixed to make it a little more accurate.
Sorry, I'm trying to pull up the document where to switch back.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, Kyle. I guess I would defer to Saria because I'm less familiar about how the word Latinx, whether it's used primarily for the people or for both the region and those. So I understand your detail-oriented point. So.
Yeah, and that's
Latin countries?
Latin American.
Right,
but yeah, we could. I mean, I think that's something that we can definitely change. I agree with that. That's a quick fix. I guess my question, just with us back on the word otherwise, that was hyperlinked in the document. And Kyle, and what I mean by that's a quick fix, meaning like we can change that. I think that's a really good point. There are other words, and I I shudder at saying other words in the document. My question is that the document was hyperlinked. Was anyone able to see that and able to use that hyperlinking as a way to understand that word in order for, are there other words that, and I feel, I want to just, I feel like we're kind of going word by word here, but my question is, did the hyperlink not work in the document? And if it did work, did it help with describing the word so that we can, be on the same page regarding the definition of that word in the document?
I found it to work. I had no problems with the definition provided. Just trying to give a response.
Yeah, I was fine too. I was fine with that too. I thought that was a good sort of compromise on how to do it.
After last meeting, I had suggested potentially putting sort of a parenthetical to define the word. But that is sort of at odds with the goal of trying to make it more readable and less complex in terms of sentence structure. I guess I would have a question, I guess, for Saria, because if we're so hung up on this one word, like, does the word excludes have the same, or does it not have the same? I mean, in my reading, it does not have the same meaning as otherwise.
It doesn't. Yeah, the word otherwise is otherwise, excuse me, I'm sorry, I'm tired. The word otherwise has a very specific meaning, and Amber, you highlighted it. Power is a lot of the language that's used in this discussion, not in this discussion, in this document, is really outlining and has to be underscored by an understanding of power differentials, right? So it's the difference between teasing and bullying, for example, right? Mm-hmm. When we think about bullying, we understand that bullying is a difference of power, whether that is perceived or real, there's a power differential. When it comes to exclude, anyone can exclude someone from a group, but mm-hmm. otherizing definitely has to not only deal with individual back and forth, but also systems of power. And so I think that that's really important to recognize in the document, and the paragraph that it is used in, I also agree, because when we, as an educational institution, we'll often ask our children if they don't understand a word, we'll say, what sentence? Look at the context of the sentence in which it was used, right? So I think the hyperlink, and then in addition to that, the paragraph, the sentence, even, bringing it down to that context, definitely the word is used in the correct context. And exclude would not bring that type of power to the word, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. David?
Thank you, Amber. I struggled to come up with the right words here. Well, first of all, whenever this comes to action, I'm certainly going to support it. I think it probably sends the wrong message not to support it. And I think, members of the board know where I stand on this. My concern is really very different. It is that as a board, we have not been, and a lot of this is COVID related, I'm sure, and Zoom related, but over time, we have not done a good job of listening to one another. And we dig in our trenches and say, we're going to fight to the death over this or that, and not take the time do I understand the point of view that's being said here? And so I don't think it's worth our time to try to argue over a word here or there, or language here or there, because, I think people are pretty much set in what they want, and it's not going to change. I just, what Jim said, I jotted this down because I thought it was if we had this as the opening paragraph, and I'm not suggesting we do this because I don't think, we're of a mind to go this way. But if we were to say the purpose of this resolution is to let our faculty know that we support them, and it goes on to say that that our administrators that we support, that were encouraged by the curricular changes, particularly social studies, and to let our students know that that it's important to us that there's a safe place for these discussions to happen, and as a message to our broader community that it's not enough just to be tolerant, that being anti-racist is important. I thought, wow, that would be a great opening statement. That would be really clear. The average person could understand that. And it's important, I think, that we gather as much community support between what we're trying to accomplish here as we possibly can, and not take the risk of unnecessarily turning people off because of the language we use. Now, that's just me. And I've said this before, and I don't want to get into a discussion of, well, we can't, I'm just offering my opinion. I know that's not likely to change any minds at this point, but I just thought it's important to articulate that. Thanks.
Amy?
Yeah. I think it's really interesting. As I get to 50 years old, I've been involved in a lot of different fields, incidentally, some professionally, some other ways. And they've run the gamut of subject matters, and many of them have their own language. I've been in the medical profession with its own language. I've now been involved with the board in education, which I drowned in the new language that I didn't understand when I first became part of this board. I've been a serious writer. I've been in the arts, and all these areas have their own languages. And inherent to language is deep nuance. The English language is so broad and deep because each word has its own unique nuance, as do other languages. And we use certain words because they have different meanings. Everybody jokes around about the Inuit language having, 50 words for snow, and they're all relevant and important. And I think that it does us a disservice if we don't acknowledge the power of language. So I hear both sides. I do understand that we want this to be accessible, but I think when we undertake a real serious effort in a realm that's new to us, it behooves us to have the proper respect to use the language of that endeavor. And that's what this document does. And I think that if we're going to undertake this kind of effort, not only do we owe it the respect to use the proper language and the nuanced terms that come with that, but then we have the commitment to teach our community what those words mean and why they matter. And you know what? I think that's enough. Thanks.
Lori?
Yeah, I just would like to ask my colleagues to think about our meeting, our work session last week. And we had a lot of public comment, and we had a lot of students sharing their thoughts about this. We had a lot of parents, community members sharing their thoughts about this. And they expressed great support for the language of this document as written because of what Amy just talked about. And that is that there is very specific power of meaning in the words. And, so if I don't feel moved to support a change in the language, it's largely because I understand the power of this language, and because the comments that we heard were so powerful. I honestly can't imagine that for the sake of trying to appease people who might at first be unaccepting of this document, that we would change things. I think that that's the wrong message. I think the message is that we believe in what we're doing. We've established a document that uses language that articulates that we believe in what we're doing, using the language of this, and this, as Amy put it, this endeavor. I think it would be disingenuous to those for whom this document means the most to water it down, to distill the language in a way that loses meaning. So I was so moved by everything that all of our attendees had to say last week, and our students were so articulate and passionate about this very specific thing. So, you know, when I think about moving the dial, I can't imagine moving the dial in a way that would alter the value, meaning, richness, specificity of this document. So.
Gretchen?
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to just say I have 2 points. One is that I find it really interesting that as a board, we often say that we, for example, should really trust Mr. Poprick's opinion about facility issues, and that the board should really have trust in what he says when he makes a recommendation. And we do the same, for example, with Mr. Brown and finance issues. And so it's occurring to me that why would we not do the exact same thing with Dr. Chatters and her contributions to this resolution? That I trust her. And this is where her recommendation is coming from, that this resolution is ready to go. So that occurred to me, and I wanted to just point that out for us to kind of think about. And then the second thing, and I know many of you have already heard me say this, but I just have to say it again, is that I do trust and believe the people who contributed to this resolution. And it went out to various groups, marginalized groups. And as Amber has said earlier in this conversation, there are students in SCASD who have experienced this otherism that we are debating so much, this concept. And as a 46-year-old white woman, I have not experienced that type of otherism, but I believe those who have. I believe them. And a lot of this resolution came from these discussions of people who said, this is what we go through being in SCASD. And so I think that, yes, I'm female, but I do have white privilege. And so I've not had these experiences that a lot of people who have contributed to this resolution have had. I believe them. And so that's why when they're saying that this language is important, I believe them, that this language is important. And I just wanted to, I know I've said that before in other meetings, but I just felt the need to say it one more time. So.
Kyle?
Thank you. I just wanted to add a little bit to this, just because it seems like we're going on and on a lot about whether the word othering should remain, or otherizing, or whatever the word there is. And it seems like there's no doubt really among anyone that it does happen, and that's what a lot of students at State College, and then just people in general, experience on a day-to-day basis. It seems like we're mostly debating whether or not the word should be there for a general audience. And it seems to me like if we have the word there are just 3 choices, which is 1, someone knows what it means and they gain like a further understanding of what the resolution's trying to say, which is good. 2, they don't know what it means and they take the time to click the hyperlink or look it up on their own, and they maybe learn a little bit more about what it means and maybe can gain a little bit of a deeper understanding in some way. And the 3rd is that they don't know what it means and they just pass over it and they still mostly understand the language of the resolution. And so I just feel like there's no really good reason to remove the word, especially because it is such an important part of what people people say, of what people say their experiences are. And again, I think everyone, at least here, believes people when they say that that's what their experience is. So I just don't see a really good reason to take it out. And I also think that the general meat of the resolution, what we're actually talking about, is way more important than a word here, a word there. And so I think the best thing for us to do would be able to go forward sooner and pass the resolution, since everyone seems to agree on what should actually be in it, instead of just debating whether one small word should be here or there.
Thanks, Kyle. Laurel?
Oh, I'm already unmuted. Sorry. Yeah, I'm going to try not to stumble over myself too much. First, I just wanted to start with a couple of comments on things that have been recently said. In terms of language and the specific language, you know, the example was given of Mr. Poprick or Mr. Brown, but certainly Mr. Brown will tell you that I have spent a lot of time, because I wanted to understand the material he was covering, asking about the meanings of particular words and digging in, because as someone else said, I think Dr. Bader, many disciplines in many areas have specific language. So I think that sometimes it is worth the effort to translate it as a way, not to appease people, but to invite them, to really invite them. And when part of your goal is to invite people to get on board and to understand the importance of what you're doing and to support it and continue to support it, not just when it's easy and mom and apple pie and why don't we all get along. So to me, as some people know, you know, everyone on the board knows, but not everyone necessarily who will look at this knows. We originally were sent a template from our Pennsylvania School Boards Association of an anti-racist resolution that boards should consider. And it was really centered on the transformative and gut-wrenching, eye-opening horror that millions of people felt in response to the murder of George Floyd. And for the first time in a long time, I was hearing conversations start with this and beginning to acknowledge, especially among white people who are sort of moderate, maybe even conservative in their politics, maybe had questioned, is this really still an issue? I was hearing a lot of spontaneous conversations about how race might be, for many people, still a risk factor for living freely and taking advantage of the benefits of this country and living up to our ideals. So with that as background, I felt this resolution was really an opportunity to significantly increase the number of people who understand that even here in Happy Valley, we have a problem with current as well as systemic racism in our schools, and we have an obligation to work to rectify it. We have, as someone alluded to, had questions over time. Do you really need a directory of equity in State College? And yes, we do. And I think what I saw as one of the opportunities of this resolution was to really affirm that and pull people into it. It was very clear at our work session how much this means to the people who have contributed. As our first sentence says, this is very different from many previous board resolutions that were just board people talking to board people. This had a tremendous amount of input and iterations as it went back and forth among groups, and now has, you know, students and employees, community members of groups and their friends, because they took it and sent it to their friends, which is good. That's how you get people to understand things and get more input. I'm not really concerned about specific words, but what I am concerned about is, well, put bluntly, I assume that people who identify as anti-racist, which I think includes the many students who have been involved and the many people who contribute, they are backing us up, and we want to confirm to them how important this is and that we do have their back, as someone said. But I also hoped that people who don't identify with that term, but are still very concerned about racism, speaking up more and more, recognizing the work more and more. I'm concerned that the overall academic, almost a polemic tone of this might cause them to just sort of say, oh, well, it's just words, or even to turn off. And that has been my concern about how the language is now can be compared to where it started from. With that, as I think Mr. Hutchinson said, certainly to not approve this because of wordsmithing like that would be, would send very much the wrong message. And so I think it's important that we do send that message. I still think that we could probably go further towards inviting people in if we relooked at the language. At the same time, I understand the impact that would likely have based on the comments we've heard on people who have contributed thus far. So, that's enough.
Thank you, Laurel. I guess I want to circle back to the question of this word otherwise. If we could set it aside for one moment, with the rest of the document, set aside that word. Are there significant concerns about wording or word usage other than that one word? And if it's that one word, is it possible to simply, would those who are particularly concerned that that word is difficult to understand, or maybe, I guess I'm having a hard time understanding if the concern about that word is whether or not it's understandable or unfamiliar, because how to ameliorate the concern, I feel like I have to better understand whether the concern is understandability or that the word itself is alienating, because the solution is different depending on what the concern is. Is it that it's difficult to understand, in which case we simply can define it, or if it's alienating in and of itself? I don't know. So I'm trying, if somebody could fill me in on.
I sure don't think that the word is considered to be new. I mean, even in the 90s, going through training to leave the classroom and be an administrator, that was part of the experience, including having an experience where you were the other for multiple days. So I don't think it's a new concept. I mean, maybe some people have never heard it before because they've never taken a multicultural type class or experience. But I do think, Saria did what we told her to do. She used her relationships to get input from a lot of people in our community who we really wanted to hear from. And, that input was heartfelt deep down, and here we are. And I don't think trying to take the words from our partners who were trying to obviously tell, you have our full commitment to working hard to improve experiences for you or your kids. And I think your policy does that. I wish we were talking about policy and not a resolution. Those of you who've been around me a long time know that I'd prefer to talk policy, because that impacts more direction to people like me. Although I do think this is loud and clear on what you have in the draft of a commitment. In our work with our faculty and students, we obviously have a lot going on, but I think looking long term, we want to get better. We want to improve experiences for all kids, especially students from marginalized populations. And this, this word, I think, I don't know if it offends certain people, but I'm not surprised to see this come through the feedback at all.
Mm-hmm. In terms of the word being familiar in that field.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Gretchen? Oh, sorry. Oh, I'm sorry.
Bob, were you finished?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay. Well, I would like to move this item to action. 7A Student Learning Board Resolution on Anti-Racism. But I also see that there's 2 attendees who have their hands raised, and it'd be nice to hear their public comments as well. So, but I'd like to move this to action.
Second.
I'd like to continue this discussion, including hearing from the two attendees before we make that decision.
If everyone's if you all would like to have if the rest of the board is interested in public comment at this time, that's fine with me to go to public comment on this item.
Still information discussion though at this point, right?
Yeah, this is info discussion, but okay. All right, I'll start with Ashley Diaz. I think we'll get quite a few public comments now that we've opened it up. Okay, Ashley, if you would like to introduce yourself, then you'll have 2 minutes to speak. If you could just tell us where you're from in the district.
Yes, can you hear me?
We can hear you, thank you.
Wonderful, good evening. My name is Ashley Diaz. I am the SCASD PSU Equity Liaison and Peer Advocate Program Coordinator. The following statement is in support for the SCASD anti-racism resolution and future equity initiatives. So I think it's imperative that we recognize that inequities continue to exist within the State College Area School District. Only by acknowledging the policies that continue to harm BIPOC students and students with marginalized identities can we form paths to equity. Equity should be at the forefront of every conversation and each decision that is made. There should be accountability at every level of the school system, starting with board members and administrators, and followed by teachers, parents, and students. And the truth is, trying to reach a consensus, debating an issue ad nauseum, or asking for buy-in from everyone only serves as a barrier and roadblock within the path of equity. Constant messages like "I support it, but," or "I want to agree to it, but this is what is wrong with it," continue to perpetuate the notion that equity is negotiable, that it is an argument that can be debated. Nevertheless, Paul Gorski states that school districts should adopt the following mindset instead. Equity is neither optional nor negotiable. This is who we are as a school. These are the values to which we will be held accountable. Therefore, we need collective action to seek education around equity and change policies, curriculum, teaching pedagogies, and school and classroom practices to reflect an equity-oriented lens and social justice education. The question, in my opinion, should not be, how popular will this policy resolution initiative be among everyone in the district? The question should be, will this policy resolution initiative provide a safe environment and equitable educational opportunities for all students, but most specifically, students who are continuously marginalized by structural inequities in our district? How will these policies change oppressive conditions for these students within schools? If we don't take the steps to continually understand our own complicity in creating structural barriers for students with marginalized identities, we cannot provide systemic and anti-racist solutions to eliminate inequities in our schools. I urge the board to consider this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Diaz. Miranda Marks, I see your hand raised, and if you'd like to introduce yourself and unmute yourself, and then you'll have 2 minutes.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, thank you.
All right, I didn't prepare anything beautiful or eloquent to say like Ashley just said. Thank you so much, Ms. Diaz. But first off, I'm just sitting here and I'm seeing an all-white board deciding what a racial equity resolution should look like. This was drafted by BIPOC students who have actually experienced what the resolution is referring to. The readability is an excuse for you not to pass a resolution that is crucial to creating an equitable SCASD community. If you're so devoted to anti-racism, as white people, you will take the time to research and better your understanding of the language. You are administrators. It is your job to educate yourself on these things. I have been attending board meeting after board meeting, and you are particularly stuck on the language of an anti-racist resolution. Where is the sense of urgency that you've had with back to school and fall sports? What I see right now is a group of white administrators going out of their way not to address the racism that goes on inside of our school walls. Stop praising the incredible students who have spoken and prove to them that you will fight for an equitable community by passing this resolution. It's the absolute least you can do. Stop being so stuck up on the political correct language and each individual word. The bulk of this resolution is creating an environment that uplifts BIPOC voices. You are so concerned about what white people will think, how white people will perceive this. That shows those students exactly where your priorities lie. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Ms. Marks. Isabel Snyder, I see your hand raised. If you'd like to unmute yourself and then introduce yourself, and then you'll have 2 minutes.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. My name is Isabel Snyder, and I'm a senior at State High. Now, I would just like to speak from a student perspective here that it frankly is so discouraging to hear meeting after meeting the same roundabout discussion about the language. Because I can tell you that frankly, as a student, when we hear you praise our work and yet turn against us in the moments that action is needed, it feels as though those words are incredibly empty. And it frankly feels as though these issues are not important when we are hearing debate about word choice, because that debate is not, as Miranda so eloquently said, that debate is not about the BIPOC students, not about the BIPOC teachers, not about the experts, students, teachers, administrators who have told you that this is necessary. This debate is no longer about what students need, about what we need to hear. This debate is becoming about your personal insecurities. And that is so discouraging and so disheartening to hear. So I would urge you to move to a vote as soon as possible, because this is what students need. And the longer it is delayed, the longer it is proven to us that this is an issue that is not a priority. This issue has spent too long on the back burner, and now this is the least we can do, to act as fast as humanly possible. And so I would urge you that the discussion is enough. And when you are hearing from students and experts and teachers that it is enough, that it is good, that when discussion continues, it is made clear that it is not about what the students need, but rather about the personal concerns of the board and the personal insecurities that you bring to your positions. And I appreciate your ability to look at these issues with a wide lens and to consider the voices of everyone. But I would just reiterate the statements that have been previously made, that waiting for consensus on these issues will never get us to where we need to be. And so signing up to wait for a consensus until we move to action is signing up to wait forever, and signing up to never move to act for the students who need it so desperately. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Snyder. Rija Sabi, I see your hand raised. If you would like to unmute yourself and introduce yourself, and then you'll have 2 minutes.
Hey, my name's Rija Sabi. I'm a junior at State High. I'm frustrated. Let me tell you why, because I'm also done being nice. This meeting and various other ones have made one thing very clear for me. Passing action items in a timely manner within the board is possible. Passing them with a consensus is also possible, at least as it pertains to sports or going back to school or playgrounds or heck with sidewalks. So why does it take so long when it comes to race? I want you to take a moment of introspection and ask yourself who you're really worried about being exclusionary towards with the readability. Which members of the audience are you worried about? Because from how I am receiving it, we seem to be more concerned about cradling people with white fragility who could possibly feel otherized, rather than attending to our BIPOC community members who are in reality otherized on a daily basis. So for goodness sake, stop mentioning readability. It is a stalling tactic that has been historically been used to prevent anti-racist work from happening. You are stalling. You have been stalling for the past several weeks. I do not care if it's intentional or not, because the end product is the same. Please stop. It's like I've been attending the same meeting these past few times. Dozens of us have told you at every single meeting that we can read. Why can't you just listen to us? It has taken over 3 months for this resolution, and yet it is still not being voted on today. Frankly, we're frustrated and we want to see a timeline. It may not seem urgent or something to rush from the perspectives of an all-white board, but as a student, and especially as a student of color, I can say every day you push this back is an additional day where microaggressions are being made and trauma is being instilled within your students. We are not rushing you. It has been 3 months. That is more than enough time to draft a statement. We have told you time and time again that we are tired of hearing you talk about it. We are tired of hearing you thank us. We are tired of promises of action rather than actual action itself. We want you to do something. So move this to an action item and vote. Do something.
Thank you, Ms. Sabi, for your comments. Matthias Mustafa, I see your hand raised. If you would like to unmute yourself and introduce yourself, and then you'll have 2 minutes.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Matthias Mustafa. I live in Port Matilda, and I'm a senior at State High. I'm speaking here tonight to bring a sense of urgency to the board resolution on anti-racism. I am very much a product of my generation, and I spend almost at a minimum a quarter of my day online. Combined with that, I am a young white male, and I see almost all the same content targeted at others like me, and it is absolutely terrifying. There is constant racist recruiters fishing for new followers everywhere with the sole goal of disenfranchising minorities. It is incredibly malicious, but just as much as it is malicious, it is well hidden to the untrained or youthful eye. It might start out as an innocuous joke about aliens in Star Wars or a post about multiplayer video games, but the second anyone engages with it, the author attempts to divert the moral compass of the reader and place them into online racist bubbles where the effects can spiral. I see this in my young white male neighbors and classmates who, while developing their own voices, get exposed to this and incorporate it into their worldview, but more importantly, into their actions. They were told all throughout elementary, middle, and high school to treat everyone with respect and kindness, but that is all immediately undone, partially by a strong online presence of racists who indoctrinate young white people into thinking it's okay to say the N-word, okay to harass other students, or as we've seen time and again on the national level, okay to kill people. There are powerful forces in State College that are actively taking our community in the wrong direction, and it terrifies me. The board needs to act to undo this. These online posts and bubbles all have one thing in common besides the hate. They don't argue about semantics, especially semantics around common language. As long as the core message gets across, everything else can be addressed later. This is just one dimension that I have chosen to focus on today, but the larger picture has an even greater impact and demands a response. This resolution on anti-racism is the exact answer we need to set the tone moving forwards, to say to all who are belittled and ignored, you deserve better and we are fixing it. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthias, for your comments. I appreciate it. And that issue and concern about online racism and the growth of hate groups online and the way they've infiltrated spaces where teenagers are is really concerning. So, Tyler Ryland, I see your hand raised. If you'd like to unmute yourself and introduce yourself, you'll have 2 minutes. Tyler, we're not able to hear you if you're speaking. Tyler, are you there now? Okay. Hi, Tyler. Oops. Tyler, are you, it looks like you're unmuted. Okay, maybe that's not working. Okay, I will return to, it looks like that's all of the public comments at this time then. Laurel, I see your hand raised.
Yes, thanks. Just to start with a small bit of quibble, but also to make sure that people do understand. This resolution first came to our Culture, Climate, and Learning Committee, which is only 4 board members, on July 22nd. So that is just over 2 months ago. It didn't go beyond that until the full board for quite some time, though people began to be more aware of it. Equity is not negotiable. 100% agree. Absolutely. If the only people that mattered in bringing about more equity were the 9 white members of this board, this would have been passed and done long ago. If I thought this would end the indignities and other things that we've heard about and that we know face, or if I thought it could really directly and immediately combat the recruiting of especially young white males to extreme racism, we'd go right away. The reason that we are talking about the wording, that some of us are, is because we care about the impact of those words And we want this to invite more people into this. This board has supported and continues to support unanimously the work being done in this district, including by Dr. Chatters. The fact that we are discussing words does not belittle our students, and it does not, that is one of my big concerns, is that they see it that way instead of understanding that we come, those of us who are asking questions about how this goes and affects people beyond the people on this board already, who are, as we are very aware, all white, and have other aspects in common. It is very painful to hear this worded as, come on, get over it and move on, because just passing this resolution, which we could do like that, you vote, done, you're done, that is not the work. It is the work that matters and that will continue to matter. We are trying to make sure and ask that we do as much as possible, that these are not hollow words. And that means understanding them and being honest with you when we say that we have concerns about how we get more people committed to this work and to understand that it's even necessary.
Thanks, Laura. Saria, I see your hand raised.
Yes, as is typical with these meetings with the students involved, they always inspire me to speak. And one thing that I want to make sure that we recognize is actually two things. When we talk about race and we talk about equity, we always talk about intent versus impact. What we're hearing right now is the impact. What we intend is what we want to stick on. We want to stick on what our intentions are. But what we really have to recognize is that there are individuals on this call, on the time last Wednesday at CCL, that are telling us what the impact is. They're telling us that this hurts. They're telling us that right now there is, all these memes going around our social media where it says, has your identity ever been a topic of legislation, right? Has your identity ever been a topic of discussion? If those types of things are not things that you've experienced at any point in your life, even as recent as today, it can be really difficult to understand why it's not easy to dig into and understand the process. It's hard to understand the process, as I always give that example of, if someone hits you with their car and they get out and they tell you they didn't intend to do it, do you just stand up and you're better because they didn't intend? You are in pain, and oftentimes you can't hear what they have to say because it hurts. Whether or not they meant it doesn't matter. You are hurt. And so I think that that's one thing that we have to listen to here, is we've asked many times with this anti-racism resolution. I was tasked with getting student voice. I was tasked with getting the voice of the community. I was tasked with getting feedback from the communities that we are wanting to put this resolution out for. The board is wanting to do that. Not only did we do that, but also those individuals have been coming to these meetings and speaking up. And at any point, I think what we really should be listening to is, are any of those individuals speaking up and saying, this resolution doesn't represent what I asked you to write? And at this point, they have not been doing that. They've been saying that it represents what it is that they have asked us to draft. So I'm hoping that we listen tonight. I'm hoping that we understand that in this work, in equity work, in race work, our intent, there are a lot of things that have happened that have been well intended, but we have to understand what the impact is. And that's what we're hearing in the public comment, what the impact is. And the impact is that this hurts. And so I'm just hoping that individuals understand this is not a piece of paper. This is the identities of students that we are describing, the identities of community members that we are talking about. And those are the individuals that we're wanting to communicate to. I'm hopeful of that.
Thank you, Saria. And I mean, enormous thanks for all of your work on this, and also for being really frank with us when it's important. Thank you. Any other board member comments? So I think the motion on the table is to move the item to action. Is that right, Gretchen?
Yes, and that was seconded by Ms. Bedell.
Okay, so Lynn, I'll just ask for a reminder. We usually, if we are moving something to action, we'd say we can do an all in favor. Is that right? In terms of preliminary? Okay. Okay, so all in favor of moving the board resolution on anti-racism to action for this evening? Aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay. Gretchen, did you want to make a motion to accept or to approve?
Sure.
Sorry, I'm trying to pull up the agenda item.
Right here. So
Yeah,
I make a motion to approve item 7A, the Student Learning Board Resolution on Anti-Racism.
Second.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. And is there any further discussion on that action item then? Okay. Any further public comment on this item? Brenton Mitchell, I see your hand raised.
Hello, my name is Brenton Mitchell. I'm a State High grad of 2002. I appreciate everybody's comments from the students that so passionately spoke. I think all of you are right. Every single perspective is right. However, I think how this issue has been framed is wrong. And you've asked Dr. Chatters and the community to put forth an anti-racism resolution and statement to reassure people of color like myself and allies that are deeply committed to anti-racist work, that the school district has our interests in mind. That is a separate issue from creating a coalition of people that might find the rhetoric and the terms inaccessible or confusing. If the district is interested in creating more coalition from people that are unwilling or might be turned off by that kind of words, then as somebody that's been deeply involved in restorative justice and dialogue initiatives for the last decade, I'd strongly encourage you to consider investing in efforts that actually bring people together. Anti-racism is anti-racism. It's not meant to bring people together. It's meant to be anti-racist. So I think those issues are separate. I think they're both really important issues, and we need both right now. I'd just encourage you all to be, or all of us to be aware of how much we're asking of ourselves within a specific context, and does the ask match that context? And again, in my opinion, I think being anti-racist is extremely important and needs to be separate from bringing unwilling, confused, frustrated people to support that work. That has to be a separate issue.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Mitchell. Tyler Ryland, I see your hand raised.
Hello?
Hi, Tyler.
Okay. I think you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good. Oh, thank God. I really support this anti-racist resolution because I feel that it is, because you've heard me talk before about it. I feel like it will help so many people in the district and community, and I feel that I definitely back up like what Dr. Chatters said about how the difference between intention and impact, and I feel that like in regarding like the impact of voting on the resolution, I think I think when we do vote on it, and hopefully I'm not sure if we are yet or whatever, but I do think that like voting for it will be, like the intention of the resolution is we saying the board, like we support anti-racism. We acknowledge the injustices faced by Black, Indigenous, people of color, and other marginalized groups. And then like voting against that would be saying that, to me at least, it would be saying that we don't support anti-racism or the acts against or acknowledge the acts against marginalized groups. Like, and I know like that's not in the intention, but that's what it's going to send across if it's not voted through, whether or not it's intended or not. So that's all I have to say.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ryland. Okay. Okay, I don't see any further public comment. Amy, I see your hand raised.
Yeah, I won't take long. I just really wanted to thank Mr. Mitchell for his comments, because I think he finally articulated something I wished I had figured out how to say before. I think that his point is really, really key, that the work, there's work involved. Relationships have to be built with people in order to get them to make changes in their minds. And no document that we put forward is necessarily going to do that. And so the commitment from this document is about exactly what he said, is making that social contract with our marginalized communities of what we think is critical and important. And then we get down to the boots on the ground work of actually trying to change hearts and minds. So I just wanted to really acknowledge that that was something I was trying to figure out how to make that distinction. And I'm really appreciative that he did so. Thanks.
Any other board member comments before we vote? Okay, we'll have a roll call vote then.
Mr. Hutchinson,
Yes.
Mr. Leos,
Yes.
Ms. Sidney,
Yes.
Dr. Bader,
Yes.
Ms. Bedell,
Yes.
Ms. Brandt,
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion,
Yes.
Dr. Duffy.
Sure. I'm here. Yes.
Okay. And I believe Mr. Fazzard had to leave.
Stepped away. Yes.
Okay.
All right. So that item has passed. Would you all like to take a 5-minute break? You do whatever we need to do for 5 minutes, and I'll turn my camera back on as soon as I'm back. Okay.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, I'm back, but since I can't tell if everyone's back, if you could just turn your camera on if you're back. Okay. Are we missing Gretchen?
She was here just a second ago, so I don't think she.
I think she froze up. Her screen froze, so she must be rebooting.
Yeah, she said Zoom keeps kicking her out.
Yeah. We've been having issues with Zoom tonight a little bit, so.
I think that there's an update to Zoom, and I think that if you haven't downloaded it yet, it could be causing problems.
Okay.
Where's Gretchen? Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting back to order. The next item on the agenda under student learning is discipline disproportionality for Black students with special ed services. And I'm going to turn this over to Dr. O'Donnell and Mr. Bach for this update.
Thank you. Although we shared an update with Culture, Climate, and Learning Committee, we'll share this with the full board. I know the next item on our agenda does pertain to one request related to one of the actions we have developed. Last year, during the spring, we were contacted by the Bureau of Special Education regarding monitoring our discipline disproportionality, and specifically related to Black students who receive special education services. And we want to share with you what the problem is, and then what are the action steps we're proposing, both short-term and longer term, to fix the problem. And so with us tonight, we have Vern Bach, Saria, Heather Pringle, and Katie Ricker, who both head up our special education programming. And so I'll turn it over to Vern at this point, and then we'll share an overview, and then our team will field any questions that you might have this evening. You're on mute, Vern.
Oh, Vern, we can't hear you.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me now? Okay, good.
Yep.
Couldn't find that unmute button. Sorry about that. I'd like to thank both Heather Pringle and Katie Ricker, our director and assistant director of special ed, as well as Dr. Chatters, in collaborating with us through developing some action steps here. They've been heavily involved in this, and really I've collaborated with them around some of these action steps. And I'd like to turn it over to Heather, Katie, and Saria to kind of give you a high-level overview. This was presented initially at CCL, I believe, back in our September CCL meeting. And so we've had several board members who have had a chance to hear some of this, but this is the first time we'll be presenting it to the full board. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Heather Pringle, our director of special ed.
Okay.
So thank you.
Thank you. So as Dr. O'Donnell said, we were notified by the Pennsylvania Bureau of Special Education this spring that we have a disproportionality in the area of discipline. The state identifies a risk ratio threshold of 2.5, and they track that pattern for 3 years. We were notified because our district has shown an increase above the threshold of 2.5 over the past 3 years. So it starts with the 2016-17 school year, 17-18, and then 18-19. In the memo, you can see that in the 2018-19 school year, our data was showed a risk ratio of 6.87. The calculation is based on the total number of incidents where Black students who receive special education were suspended from school. It includes both in-school and out-of-school suspension days, and it's compared to their non-Black peers. And you can see the math for the 2018-19 school year in the memo. Katie Ricker, myself, and Saria Chatters are engaging with our administrative team. We're also including input from the race and marginalized populations, as well as the disability issues work groups. As you can see on the next agenda item, we're proposing that the district approve an equity audit led by Dr. Paul Gorski from the Equity Literacy Institute. Oh my gosh. Oh, I'm still here. Sorry, I lost you guys. I couldn't find you guys. Sorry about that. So as I was saying, the next agenda item, we'll be discussing the proposal for the equity audit led by Dr. Gorski. We're also engaging a team across the district in a racial equity facilitator training that's starting tomorrow, as a matter of fact. District-wide professional development in this area. As a result of being identified as significantly disproportionate, the Bureau of Special Education requires us as a district to reserve 15% of our IDEA funds for the 2021 school year to provide coordinated early intervening services. So that's where some of these items, that's how they'll be funded. And then we need to review and revise our written policies and procedures related to discipline, and then publicly report and bring that back to the board. So I'll open up for any questions that our team might be able to answer.
Board members, any questions? Kyle?
So just to make sure I'm reading this right, this rate means that about 40% of Black special ed kids at State High in a given year got suspended, and that rate's 7 times higher than white kids. Like, is that right?
So when you look at the data in the memo, the 17 is the number of incidents, not the number of students.
Okay.
Okay. And then the comparison is compared to their peers, there were 40 incidents of suspension.
And just to add clarity, when Heather says peers, we're talking about Black students who are identified special ed and non-Black students who are identified
Correct.
Sure. But the rate is 7 times as high. Like 6.87 it says. So that's what that number means.
So that's the risk ratio, yeah. So the threshold is 2.5 for the state. Once it's above that, then it's flagged, I guess you could say, because it's above the risk ratio.
All right, thanks. That's a lot.
Laura?
Oops.
Laura.
Sorry. Yeah. So if the state is going to review and we do review as well, have they begun their review of policies, practices, and procedures yet?
We do the review as the district and then provide assurance to PDE that that's been completed.
Okay. Fine. Thank you very much.
Sure.
The special ed department at PD does do evaluations of districts. So I don't know how many years they come out and do the site visit and do the eval. Heather, I don't remember the last time they've been in town.
For compliance monitoring? Yeah, they're coming in December. We'll be back.
There you go.
Lori?
Thank you. Is there anything that we can do in the interim while we're waiting for training to happen, for equity audits to happen? It was suggested by a community member that perhaps we have a moratorium on suspensions, or, I mean, is there anything that we can do to ensure that we're protecting kids? And I think particularly at the elementary level, you know, the idea of suspensions is particularly concerning. So, you know, just what's happening in the meantime.
I think number one there is the clear one that we wanted to make sure we were intervening with both Heather and Saria, but also assistant superintendents are involved with all the principals on that one, so that what's the stopgap is how I've asked that. And I don't think we want to just make an absolute without an understanding a situation, so that if there is safety involved, we want to be responsive to the situation, but we want to involve the district level team to help support principals and faculty members and any involved students if something does come up where something would trigger something in a code of conduct, that our team can step in and take a look at the situation so that we understand what we need to do. If we need additional help, we'll ask for it. But I think that's where we are, Lori, with involving the district team, Heather, Katie, and Saria, along with the assistant superintendent, so that we're not making quick decisions in situations with Black students who receive special education services if there are any behavior challenges that could result in any type of a suspension.
Can I just ask a follow-up? I know that this is primarily looking at our special ed students, and I know that the equity audit is going to give us a broader picture of what things look like. But you know, again, if we could just be thoughtful about, you know, in the interim, just being cognizant that a bias is happening, and that it's not unlikely that it isn't also happening outside of special ed. So just a concern that I have, and that we're really thoughtful about all of our students in that way.
Absolutely.
Any other board member questions or comments? Jim?
Yeah, following up on what Lori just said, do we get these same numbers for you know, I guess regular ed students in you know, as opposed to the special ed, or is this?
So the only information that was reported to us was the special education numbers. However, I do believe that part of the equity audit may include all, and Saria could confirm that.
Yeah, so that, sorry.
Go ahead, Saria.
Yeah, so no, one of the purposes, because as you all know from the time that, you know, our very first update from the equity office, we've been talking about an equity audit, and a really important part of that equity audit is reviewing discipline of all students, because yes, from the legal standpoint, the Department of Special, you know, the special education, the state getting in contact with us regarding this disproportionate report is one thing, but our commitment to equity as a district necessitates that we look deeper. And it also necessitates that we ensure that not only African-American students with special education needs, but we look at all students of color, and looking at the discipline, you know, let's say whether or not there's disproportionality there, as well as looking at students who come from economically disadvantaged backgrounds, students that speak English as a second language, and the list continues to go on. So the equity audit is going to look at all students, but no, we did not receive a report or kind of like a charge to look at any other specific group.
Right.
Great. Okay, that's a good answer, and that's one of the reasons we need this.
One of the things that we've done in the elementary ranks since Vern was here is they started electronically tracking any type of disciplinary incidents. They are few, much fewer than in the secondary schools, but I think that that's enabled us to better understand, and also that information will be used with the audit. Thanks.
Laurel?
Yes, just a second, let me get back to that. I'm sorry, my question has just disappeared from my brain. It may come back.
Kyle?
Thank you. Can we get a rundown, or like, did the state send us a rundown of what the actual infractions were that caused the different suspensions? Because if it's like one or two specific things, like accumulated, like if it's accumulated smaller infractions or things that are fixable on a more superficial level, that would be really good to know Whereas if it's really just across the board, the rate for Black students is like 7 times higher than the rate for white students. That also seems like it would be good to know, because I don't know exactly what punishments result in suspensions at State High, but if it's something like repeated being late to school or repeated interruptions in class or something that gets like through the level 1, level 2, etc. In the student handbook, it would be really good to know actually what the things are that cause each of these different infractions so that we can figure out how to solve the problem. So does that data exist?
Yeah, and so Kyle, I think that's a good question. I think that's something that we're digging into behind the scenes. Of the state unfortunately didn't provide us that data, but we have that data, and we're going back through and looking at that data to identify what were the infractions, and also through the equity audit, taking a deeper dive and looking at, you know, when we're disciplining Black students for an incident, are we doing the same things for other students, and is it equitable or not? And so really taking a deeper dive into the data and kind of examining that is what we're engaging in now and what we will be doing through the equity audit. So I think that's a good point.
All right, thanks so much. Oh yeah,
I want to add to that, Kyle, that one of the things we will look at the different infractions, but we also want to focus on, we know that just looking at this data itself and understanding equity as a whole, that equity really points to, and also when we just finished with our anti-racism resolution, systemic issues, right? So there, when we look at infractions, we're kind of looking at an endpoint, right? So we're looking at a point in time in which something occurred. What we are not looking at or understanding, which is really where we're looking at and needing a full-scale equity audit to help us understand, is when Heather just mentioned teacher training individuals, what kinds of things led that student to getting to that endpoint, right? And there's obviously things within our system, and this is what our data is showing us, that are inequitably having different students that are based on race end up at a specific point. And our system, as Bob had said, doesn't have the stop gaps in place, may not have the specific other parts or pieces in place to help to prevent this disproportionality. So one of the things that we really want to be careful of, and I know that Heather has talked about as well, and making sure that we look at our system and we not look specifically at each student, because when we focus too harshly on the student and the specific infraction, what happens is we may miss the larger parts of the system that we're needing to work to fix in order to fix the overall issue, right? So it could be a number of things. The infractions are, we'll say, something that we'll look at, but our main focus is going to be looking at the overall system as a whole.
All right, thank you so much. Yeah,
I was just going to say, I think what Kyle might, though, have been getting at is that, for example, are Black students having multiple infractions for insubordination, which may be because of a racial bias about that, and because they've had multiple ones, then it leads up to more severe penalties. In terms of the trend, was that kind of what you were asking about? Like in terms of, are they having multiple small incidents that are leading to these bigger things? So not so much as the individual student, but a trend that more, that Black students may have more repeat small instances that lead up to bigger problems, as opposed to students who aren't, that say just have one incident and get a suspension because they're being treated differently.
Well, what I was kind of trying to get at, and I don't know if I worded it right or something, was that like generally just because of like systemic racism and structures like that, like Black students are generally economically worse off. And so if there are certain things that could help correct some of this racial bias, if you have punishments that are really mostly, like the one that I had in mind, for instance, was like tardiness, being late to school or something. And a lot of that, I think, like empirically can be affected by how good your home life is, stuff like that. And a lot of that is like tied to family income, which on average is like, because of segregation and because of redlining and systemic racism, is lower for Black students. If maybe changing the punishment structure with regard to some things like that, where issuing a suspension might have a greater effect on that kid's ability to learn than showing up in school a couple minutes late. So that's what I was trying to kind of get at, whether we could reduce some of the bias like that.
Let's get at school all day. And I love you no matter what. No, it's too boring Monday at school.
Gretchen, you're not on mute.
I think you're unmuted.
So Kyle, you see me smiling because I really like the way that you just connected all of those things to systemic issues, right? And you're thinking right along the lines that we are looking at this. And we're looking at this of how are systemic issues, right, causing that endpoint. So yes, the endpoint is important, right, to look at tardies, insubordination, and insubordination is on its face, and disrespectful language are two certain things that students of color are often disciplined for. And it comes down to also just tons of research that's been said that students of color are seen to be more aggressive and all of these kinds of things that are rooted in racial bias. One of the key things that I wanted to focus on there too, though, is that one of the things that you'll notice whenever racial bias is at play is that the unfortunate part is economic disadvantage. It plays a part, but it doesn't play the main part, right? So even when we're boiling it down, we still get back to race, right? Being that common denominator. So we even have families who will be from a middle class or well-off socioeconomic status that have children who have disabilities who are also students of color, who will still fall victim to a system that we definitely need to look at, and we need to look at to work on fixing. So that's why I wanted to let you know, Kyle, that it's yes and. So yes, those are important, and we're looking at the system. Yes.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And then my second question, I don't want to take up too much time, so I don't know if this is best here or best at another point. But when we're talking about the disparities by race and suspensions, I don't know if this is a good time to talk about like suspensions as a whole concept, which is that it seems like a really weird way to deal with discipline and deal with helping kids who are not doing well learn. That we decide that if you're not doing well and not doing well in school or causing trouble outside of school or in school, the way we're going to fix that is by kicking you out of the building for a week. You can go do whatever you want for that week during school hours when you'd normally be doing something productive, and you're going to miss a week of school while you're which you're not going to really be able to make up necessarily. So I wonder if suspensions, both in terms of a racial bias point of view and just more broadly, are really something that might be productive. And again, I don't know if this is the right time to bring that up, but I feel like it could help deal with some of the racial bias stuff.
We're going to look at suspensions, but also behaviors that relate to those suspensions, and see what can we do more proactively with students. Obviously, if there's a safety situation where a student's hurting another student, things like that, we need to make the situation safe first. But looking at the root cause of what's causing the student's behavior to be more proactive, and we actually have been discussing something related to improving our expertise in this area. But with that said, there is an action step on there with our IMH team and a recommendation from them. And so, but yes, I guarantee you we'll be talking about suspensions. And then obviously if you get rid of them, what do you replace them with? And
sure,
will that be helpful for the students so that they're more successful regardless?
Absolutely. Well, thank you.
You bet.
Laurel?
Thanks. Remembered what I was looking at. 2 questions. This only is about Black students and not 2 or more races. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And is that identified by the student or the family or the school? Who categorizes kids?
Whenever students register, it's how they
self-identify. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's identification.
Okay. And then my other question is whether this also looks at whether Black students are disproportionately labeled as being in special education, or if that is a totally different thing, or if that is connected in here, because that would also potentially affect things?
I think that's a good question, Laura. I think the state has 3 different measures for disproportionality. One of those measures is looking at the overall identification of special ed students by race, and is there over identification there? We have no warnings or concerns with that piece. Also, they look at the placement of special ed students in alternate settings. And then the third disproportionality measure is the one we're looking at today. And so the other 2, we've not received any notification from the state that we've exceeded the threshold. For the other 2 measures, it's a risk ratio of 3.0, and with discipline, it's a risk ratio of 2.5.
And in terms of that risk ratio, is that a statewide average, or is that specific to, given the numbers in this district, this is, there's a disparity in this district even, or is it looking at how we compare to other districts around the state?
That's a state identified risk ratio. Through IDEA, the federal government does provide some states latitude, and Pennsylvania has selected 2.5 as the risk ratio for incidents of discipline.
So just to make sure I understand this, even if every single district in the state were at this number, then every single district in the state would get a notice like this.
Correct.
Okay.
Jim,
Yeah,
I see you.
I think Amy made most of the point that I was going to make in terms of clarification of Kyle's question. But Kyle, interrupt me if I'm off base here. I don't think that you were talking about individual students. You were talking about sort of classes of infractions. And if you
that's what I was getting at.
Yeah, and if you could bin those, are there any that are more typical, and how much of that is an outlier from the rest of the state high community or the state college community in general? And then to Vernon's point, this is our data, right? So this is our data that we share with them. So we certainly could do the things that Lori was asking about is this true for our population in general? Is this true for our Black population in general, or students of color in general? So and I assume that that's part of what the equity audit will do, but we certainly have historical data in terms of that, and we have the the data that's relevant to this particular time period that the special education department was looking at. So we could sort of do this ourselves rather quickly. But the other point I'll make is I really like the way you're framing this, Saria, in terms of this is an endpoint, but how did we get here? What factors led up to there's somebody crossed the threshold to a point that they received a suspension. How did we get here? What factors were in that? And I like that formalism, because I think that can help us cut it off earlier before it crosses the threshold. So thank you for thinking of it that way. I hadn't thought of it that way, but that's a really good point.
Yeah, agreed. Other questions on this? So in terms of, is there any further board action or steps that we need to be aware of in regard to ameliorating this that would come back to the board, other than, obviously we're working through the equity audit, but that's somewhat separate from the state process?
We had shared in the memo that we'll come back with an update regarding this later in the year. And then obviously the individual actions that if we need to have board approval to move with any of the particular actions or recommendations that come out of the different groups that are working with us, we'll return to the board with those as well.
Okay, sounds good.
Hence the next item on the agenda too. So
yes, so we can probably transition into the proposed equity audit, and then I'll turn this over to Dr. O'Donnell and Dr. Chatters to introduce.
You bet. Saria did a lot of the legwork for this, talked with PDE, PSBA, and Heather Bennett, who some of you have met with in doing our homework in regard to this. We had hoped to get to this in the spring. That was our plan, but we didn't. And, here we are, and it does tie in to help us with what we just discussed, but also, broader challenges that we want to better understand and then prioritize. So I'm going to ask Saria to speak to this because she did the prep work on this. And thanks, Saria.
Sure. So as a part of, this is now directly connected to the significant disproportionality memo in our response. But as I'd indicated earlier, this is something, and Bob, Dr. O'Donnell, that we've been trying to work toward for some time. This equity audit we are proposing in this, I want to be clear about this part of the equity audit. This is phase one of this equity audit. An equity audit typically includes policy review, policy and procedure review of handbooks, review of data, all discipline referral data, a review of any kinds of existing data that we have that can be broken into demographics. So what that means is looking at, for example, courses at your high schools, for example, and looking at the demographics of students that are in AP classes versus students that are in honors classes versus students that are in seminar classes. So any kinds of existing data that we are able to pull, that we are able to disaggregate by demographics is what will be included in this equity audit and review. We have proposed to go with the Equity Literacy Institute for this phase one, which is going to focus on, if you notice in the memo, a review of our handbooks. That's our elementary, middle, and high school handbook, a review of our policies, and a review of our data, and mainly focusing on our disciplinary referrals. Some of those the key purposes of a review of the handbooks, because I know that there was questions and concern on Wednesday that we had also proposed a review of the handbooks by the International Institute of Restorative Practices. It's important to note that if you look at our equity systems continuum that's been provided by PSBA, equity is at the foundation of everything that we do. And one of those key things is that if we don't first do a review of our handbooks, our policies and procedures for equity, anything that we apply within our district without doing that first review would be applied inequitably. So it's really important that we do that equity pass first. So this equity audit does not replace reviewing your handbooks and looking at it with a restorative practices lens, which will also help us walk toward that language that we're discussing, which is trying to reframe and move away from suspension, right? So it's all a process. So the first part is looking at our handbooks for equity concerns. And then the second part is going to be looking at that data and then also looking at discipline referrals. I know that there was also a concern about how we came to using the Equity Literacy Institute. As some of you may know, I work closely with Dr. Heather Bennett and the PSBA, and then also I work closely with the consultant for PDE on equity, both of them who consult with all of our school districts within the state of Pennsylvania. The Equity Literacy Institute and Dr. Paul Gorski came highly recommended by both of them. In addition to that, I have reviewed Dr. Gorski's many articles and books and work and such, and he comes highly recommended with a review of looking at equity from the lens of race, which is one of our primary focus areas for this review, as well as looking at it from a lens of economic disadvantage for students as well. In addition to this equity audit, I just want to make clear that in the previous document that we were just looking at regarding the memo that Heather was reviewing, we're also going to be working directly with our disability and race and marginalized populations work groups as we are working through this, because an equity audit is great, but in addition to that, you want to make sure that you are including your community members. And our disability and race and marginalized populations work group have experts on both of those work groups that are experts not only in race, but as well as in disability. And then the last question that was a question of concern was, why are we doing a third-party audit? we had always proposed and we're working our way up toward doing a third-party audit. We were looking at putting together that district-wide equity leadership team, which we had discussed in previous equity updates. That was thoroughly derailed, as we know, by COVID. However, one of the key things that we want to ensure that, you know, our community understands is that the notification of the significant disproportionality is something that we take very seriously, and we are proposing that we take action. And so that means that this goes beyond us as a system auditing ourselves, that we are proposing that it is really important that we have a third party and an individual who's a leader in the field come in and do this audit to help us ensure that we are equitably serving our communities, and more specifically, our families with Black students with special education needs, and then all of our marginalized families and communities.
Saria, in terms of the finished product of the equity audit, would we have, would it be possible to have so I assume they'll be providing us with issues, sort of identifying issues of concern. Is there a way to sort of structure this in a way so we have benchmarks to reach goals going forward?
So yes, so after an equity audit basically provides you with, of course, looking at your strengths, your areas of concern, right? And it's going to provide you with recommendations. And from that information, it is then really important. Heather, Katie, and I, as well as Will and Vern, work very closely with the Equity Literacy Institute as they are pulling this data, so we can gain a better understanding of what they are bringing together. And then from those recommendations, a discussion with this team will help us to develop a focus, right? Because it's really going to be important that once you get those recommendations, what are you focusing on next? Phase 2, which I want to be really clear about in equity audit as well, includes surveys, focus groups, and a number of other things in a wide scale equity audit that right now in the time of COVID, we did not feel was a great thing to fly a consultant here in this case and get started with those kinds of pieces. But we feel that, this work needs to start now. So in phase 1 is going to provide us with the recommendations. We can come together as a team, look at those recommendations, work along with the Equity Literacy Institute to develop goals, and then make sure that we're focusing as we move into looking at what we're going to do for phase 2.
Okay, thank you. Laurel?
Yeah, thank you. Couple things. This audit, how does this tie in? We just passed the resolution on anti-racism, which refers to a third-party audit. This seems to me, but we're also talking about this in relation to the previous topic of the disproportionality and the piece that we are required by the state to do. Can you put those, are these one and the same, or is that what you were talking about with the phases? Can you talk a little about that?
So all 3 discussions of audits are all one and the same. So meaning that in our January equity update, I discussed an equity audit. Actually, prior to that, I discussed an equity audit and putting together a district-wide leadership team that would bring us to an equity audit. Then in the anti-racism resolution, we discussed an equity audit, and now with significant disproportionality, we're discussing an equity audit. One of the key things to notice is that in order for us to work toward improving any of these aspects, we have to understand where we stand as a district, right? That is the key to the foundation of all of this work, is understanding where we stand, what is our data telling us. And I will say that the significant disproportionality memo, one of the things why I keep pointing back to that is to note that when I've been updating with our memos, I've been saying this is something that we need to do. So I think that the significant disproportionality memo, again, even puts a period on that we absolutely, actually it puts more than a period, it puts a now period that we need to get this done.
And then the other thing is, and this is certainly not specific to this, it has been a long-standing concern, but I think it's a particular concern with this, is that, you know, if we're going to do an audit and have recommendations coming forward, having buy-in to the credibility and having people not want to just put it on the shelf, but have to actually own it and move on with it, requires a degree of trust in how we got here in the first place. And that's why in general, I've said that, you know, I thought it would be a good idea to have a request for proposals. So we as a board, but also the community can see, you know, different people have different approaches and do different, structure things somewhat differently. And that is the type of process that I tend to think is the most transparent and the best to follow, both for the community and also for building, setting the groundwork for these things to be followed up on once they come back.
So one of the things, so one of the things that's important to note is that there are a couple of recommendations that are made in our notification of significant disproportionality. A part of those is that we have to notify PDE of our policy and process changes that we have noticed, recognized. In addition to that, all of these recommendations that are brought forward are going to be really important for us to work on if we want to see substantive change in these numbers. And so I think that we do have not only buy-in and because we have our team, for example, going to our training tomorrow, right? So we're already starting on this process. But in addition to that, there are a number of parts of this, this whole process that necessitate that we move forward with what our findings are.
Dan?
Yeah, just a quick question. I'm not sure where things stood with the survey work that Ed Fuller was doing. And I'm trying to recall whether Ed had incorporated some equity content into his last cycle of surveying and opportunities to speak with students. I'm wondering, and if that's the case, would there be relevance to that information for picking up the thread with the visiting equity audit?
So I know that that Ed Fuller did add some questions in the survey and was also working toward add questions to the survey that were asking questions around race and bias, and also was working toward doing focus groups with students. One of the key things that which you noticed actually in the memo that came previous to this one, which is our significant disproportionality memo, is where we mentioned working with the Center for Education and Civil Rights. In that case with Dr. Erica Frankenberg, who's done some professional development in our district. One of the key things is that as you're working through this equity audit, we want to make sure that those recommendations inform phase 2. Right. But in addition to that, we want to ensure that Ed Fuller is a survey expert in the field. We want to make sure that we're also bringing in individuals that are also experts in civil rights, right, and experts in equity and social justice as we are working to make these to develop these surveys, but also to inform the questions that we are looking to ask. So absolutely, I think that it's always important because of Ed Fuller's expertise that we move forward with surveying our district. It helps us to not only know where we came from, but where we're going. As we're doing this more specific focus, as you heard me kind of lay out all of those reasons as to why we're going with Dr. Gorski, I would say that for the phase 2 part as well, we're going to want to ensure that we're still also working with groups that are experts in surveying, but also experts in civil rights, social justice, and education.
So I think what you're saying is that because it's not necessarily Ed's area of expertise, doesn't specialize in this field, that there'd be no use of the data he gathered.
No, not saying no use. So I'll give you an example. One of the things we continue to use Ed's survey for climate,
right? When we do, his survey is a climate survey. Last year, when we did No Place for Hate, we brought in a specific survey that was asking about climate as it relates to bias, race, and bullying, right? And this was done by the Anti-Defamation League as a part of that process, and that was a research-based process. So yes, when we're looking at climate overall, I'm not saying that there's no value in that data. What I'm saying is that we can continue to use that survey, but there are going to be, when we are reaching out to, connecting with, and listening to the voices of marginalized communities, once the phase 1 is done, we get our recommendations, we understand our focus, we're going to still want to make sure that we're bringing in an individual that, because remember, we talk about survey overall, we want someone that's surveying equity, social justice, and allowing us to be able to put those things in place. So a focus group, Ed could survey, do the entire climate survey, but at the same time, we can be working with individuals who are experts in the field to be running the focus groups, because they have the data, the research, and the foundation for the questions that they need to be asking and what they're looking for.
So I mean, so what you're saying essentially that they're like a Venn diagram. There may be some areas of overlap, but this is a specialized treatment, if you will, specialized assessment.
Correct.
One's not this. They shouldn't be conflated. One is not the same as the other.
Correct.
And so it might. And so in order to move forward with the equity audit, it's a specialized intervention, an assessment intervention, basically. Thank you.
Okay, so so what's the next step here? We'll need to approve this as a board in order to move forward with the contract with Gorcey's group, or with the Equity Literacy Institute.
Can I ask a question that is usually Laurel's purview? What will be as we go down the road with this and we go to various phases, what's the projected costs for the phases that will follow?
So I can't tell you what the projected cost for phase 2 is, because phase 2 is going to be dependent upon phase 1, right? So we have to determine what our focus is going to be. And that's something that, the leadership team, the administrative team, once they get the recommendations, has to sit down and review and determine, okay, where are we focusing? Where are we going next? And that's going to then determine what next steps are. So I can't tell you what that is going to look like yet. And even when it comes to, because like I said, it's just really got to be dependent upon what we're doing here. We really have to value what we learn from the audit to kind of help us to determine what we do next.
So I'll be a little more skeptical, but what would be could the person inform us in terms of the ranges based on the size of the school district, for example, with whom he's consulted? What would be the range we could anticipate the cost of something like this?
So I could definitely ask Dr. Gorski of the ranges. I can ask him about what his ranges would be, but as you kind of heard me say before, one of the key things is that we are working with Dr. Gorski to do this first pass. He's a third party. He is we are hoping that he is approved to come through and do that first pass. The second pass, when we get those recommendations, we can continue with working with him. And we could also, because this contract is only for phase 1, right? That's it. If we see the recommendations and we see that, hey, this is something that we can collaborate with the Center for Education and Civil Rights to do, then we can move with them, right? This is only phase 1. I'm really trying to make sure that it's separate from what we do next, because I really think that it's important that the administrative team determine what they're going to do next and then who is best to work with to get that done. That's
great, Stuart. Thank you very much. I apologize for being so picky, but I'm just trying to get a sense for the larger scheme of what's going on. Thank you.
And obviously, Dr. Duffy, any subsequent work, we'd enter into another contract and bring that forward to you.
You bet. Thank you, Vern.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So the statement of work is essentially what we would be asked to approve as a board then?
I'm shaking my head like I know. I'm guessing.
It's a Randy question.
That's a Randy question.
Yes, because that's where the expenditures listed, right, Randy?
Correct.
Laurel, and then we should start to move on because we still have a couple more items here.
Yeah, that actually, the other reason that I tend to like RFPs is because it puts costs, it gives you a comparison. And with these, we are not bound by, correct me if I'm wrong, Randy or Scott, we're not bound by the lowest bidder. You wouldn't want that, but it does help give some perspective. I mean, this amount actually looked on the low side to me for a very comprehensive process, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's 10 times what most people charge. I doubt that, but usually that is also a thing that you get from RFPs. And if we're not doing an RFP, I think it would be helpful, respecting, of course, the recommendation, the people you've talked with, to still get, some a brief comparison. If you've gone to a couple of other places and can say, okay, this is what it had cost there and there, to help put this into perspective, as well as getting some examples of other places that Dr. Gorski or his institute have worked, sort of the way, again, you would often have in an RFP, you would ask people to give references. So I think moving forward, even if we don't go the RFP process, it would be helpful to have that information as a sort of context.
Okay. All right. Bob, so would we expect then to see this back on our next word agenda then? Is that?
Yes, please.
Great. Sounds good. Thank you. Okay, so then moving on then to item D is the fiscal stewardship 2019-2020 financial results. And I'll turn it over to Mr. Brown for this.
Thank you, Ms. Concepcion. This information was mostly reviewed with the Finance Committee, but we wanted to make sure that the full board had an opportunity to receive this information. We're in the beginning of the school year. However, we're finishing up last fiscal year, and we have an annual financial report that's due by the end of October to the state, and we also have an annual audit that is usually completed in the November timeframe, so that we make sure that we can meet all of our required submissions related to our bond financing and our financial reporting. So we highlighted during the, and Nabil, if you could bring up the presentation so we can go through that briefly, please. Thank you. You can go to the next slide. So in reviewing our 1920 revenue, we had actual revenue of just under $168 million. We were projected at $166,100,000. That projection was updated after the COVID pandemic began. So as you may remember, or you may have forgotten, because of all the other details that have gone on in the last approximately 6 months. But we did expect some of our revenues to decrease from our previously projected levels. But looking at our projections, our actual revenue was up about $1.8 million, or 1.1% of the projected revenue. Moving on to the next slide. We show here our actual and our projected, and then the variance, and we can see that local revenue was up about $2 million, state revenue was down $700,000, and federal revenue was up $444,000. The state revenue being down was primarily related to our salaries, expenses, and then being lower than expected, and then the associated retirement and Social Security expenses. And in this case, we receive about half that from a state reimbursement. So those amounts are lower as well. And we just were, there was also another line related to a DCED grant, which was for one of our capital projects, that we received lower amounts of money than we had expected. On the federal category, it's primarily in our access funds, and there just was more money available for reimbursing us for services than we had expected. On the local side, the majority you can see we're in 3 categories of that revenue: earned income, realty transfer, and delinquent. And we can go into, we look at all of these categories in greater detail, but obviously the summary here is that they all were much higher than, not much higher, but higher than we had expected. And we had made some adjustments down on our projections because of the pandemic and not knowing what those results would eventually look like. We are continuing to monitor those, and we'll talk about that in the future, but for future years, we're very concerned about those numbers as well, and we'll continue to monitor those and share that information. Moving on to the next slide, please. This is a graph that you may want to go back as an individual and look at a little bit closer, but this just shows a comparison to of the actual variances in our projections to our actual once we have those results. And of these 6 revenue types, and the different colors represent the different fiscal years. And you can see that in all but earned income and delinquent real estate, we're typically much closer, a little bit closer to our projection as far as our actual. But again, with the pandemic, we believe that we had made some assumptions, and because we just weren't aware, we were taking our economic indicators and measuring as best we could. Moving on to the next slide. This is just a typical slide that we show our earned income tax historical percentage net change year over year. And you can see that in 1920, this is one of our lower increases. It was a net change, and it was a positive change, but it is a little bit lower than what we've experienced in the last several years. Next slide. Transfer tax revenue. Transfer tax revenue obviously is when properties are sold. We ended up almost matching the prior year, and that was related to several larger transactions that we were not sure of whether they would continue, as well as just the volume of the smaller transactions. We had some uncertainty. We'll continue to monitor that, and I honestly can't even speak to what this year looks like yet. We need to finish up last year, and then we'll begin looking at this year to look at understand the projections for the future year. Moving on. Historical interim real estate tax. Interim real estate tax, just as a refresher, is any tax for properties that were not on the tax rolls on July 1. So they would be billed out mid-year at the February 1 billing. And again, they are due by June 30, but in some cases, we have seen that especially large amounts are not paid until December 31, when they would go to collection possibly, and for lack of payment. So we weren't sure again where these would end up, but we did exceed the prior year amount. Okay, next slide, please. Looking at actual expenses, our actual expenses were 155 million. Our projected expenses were just under 158 million. So we had expenses less than projected of about 2.5 million, which is about 1.6%. Next slide. And you can see from a percentage standpoint and also a dollar standpoint, the variances here in our estimates. And we were just over 0.5% at 0.6% difference on our salaries, 0.8% on our healthcare, just over 1% on PSERS, and 2.3% on our other benefits. And that, quite honestly, had to be related to dental claims, being lower in significant amount. And that was related to the pandemic and the dental offices being closed. And I'll be quite honest, we didn't even think about reducing the projections because of that. And in large part because we didn't know how long the closure would be. And I just didn't think about that. And then professional services were significantly lower. And in large part, that was due to a credit or a refund from our earned income tax collection fees that we weren't aware of when we made our projections. Next slide. And then we go on to other purchase services, which we had some, we've noted there some changes that were fortunately declines in expenses that ended up holding true. Supplies and equipment were actually higher, and part of that was higher than budget projected utility costs. We had transfer and contingencies were lower because we had left a lot of contingency in our projection because we weren't sure of any additional costs that we would incur. And then we did also receive $645,000 worth of COVID grant funding that we were able to take advantage of. So that reduced our need for contingency as well. And then our transfer to capital projects is lower because of projects not being completed. I'm sorry, this is related to a DCED grant, and this is related to the state revenue decline. We did not end up receiving as much revenue, therefore we weren't transferring it to the capital projects line as what we had expected. Next slide, please. So the end result is that we are proposing a transfer to capital reserve fund of $3,081,000 and change. PSERS fund balance, we're proposing no usage for the year of that leaves a balance of 2.6 million available for future years. The COVID assigned fund balance would be assigned at 10,158,000. And then this does include a food service transfer of 466,000. And that's, in large part to the additional costs that food service had that weren't able to be funded through regular revenues. Food service did receive funding from the federal government for the food distribution, but in the latter part of the year is when they have a lot of additional revenue come in. People are really used to buying the meals and especially the a la carte items, and we didn't experience that this year because of the closure. Moving on to the next slide. So this is just a summary slide pulling all of the information that we've brought together in this presentation for you. Next slide. So we'll have an unassigned fund balance of 12.5 million, which is just under the maximum 8% at 7.92%. Next slide. And these are key dates. So unless there's any concerns or resulting from any discussion tonight, we'll be presenting a resolution for all of the transfers to the various funds that we showed tonight and the assignment of the fund balances at the next meeting on October 19th and ask you to approve those. As I said earlier, there is a filing with the state for the annual financial report due October 31st that we'll complete. We're expecting to have a review of the management discussion and analysis for you on November 2nd. And then on November 16th, you'll be asked to approve that. That will then become a part of our audited financial statements where they will be presented to the board for approval on December 7th. And then by December 27th, we'll have our continuing disclosures posted to EMA, the Electronic Municipal Market Access Board, which is our requirements with our financings. Does anybody have any other questions or comments? Your packet does include comparisons not only to projected, but also to original budget, and we'll use those in the future when we build this year's, when we're comparing this year's budget and then also building the budget for the next fiscal year.
Thank you, Randy.
Any comments or questions?
Dan?
Quick question, Randy. Thanks for the overview. That's better news than we had expected, given the earlier review. We had, and this is a business office question, but it's not directly related to your presentation. There was some discussion about a bond sale, an opportunity for that came up and I'm not sure where things, am I misreading something? Did I mishear something along the way?
We already had our bond sale, Donna, that was back in August, correct?
Time flies. I believe so, yes.
Right.
Yes. And that resulted in almost the expected savings.
Okay. I don't need specifics right now. I don't know if we, and I don't know if a board, sometimes we get an opportunity to review that that is good news when it happens. So yes. I guess we'll still hear about that.
Because you're right, Dan, and I apologize, because of the pandemic and all of the issues related to school being open or school being closed. We had that scheduled for a board agenda and we pulled that off, and we did not invite those folks back. So I'll make sure we get the materials and we can look at that in Finance Committee.
Sounds really good. Thank you very much. Thanks, Randy.
Thanks. Jim?
Yes. So are we going to have a opportunity to, as the Finance Committee, to look at your the management discussion before it's presented to the board?
If as long as time permits, yes, okay. Absolutely. Because of the timeline, we may need to schedule an extra meeting or move that finance meeting to another date because of schedules, but we can do that, yes.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions on this? Okay, so we'll move on to the 2021-2022 budget development.
All right, thank you. So what I've supplied this evening with Donna's assistance is just a very brief memo. The purpose here is to let you know that we haven't forgotten about developing next year's budget. Your attachments include a notice that the Pennsylvania just released the Act 1 index for the fiscal year 22, and it's 3%. So we will have a maximum tax increase available to us of 3%. And so we provided that information. We've also provided timelines for different due dates as required by the Act 1 process. What we'll do is for the next finance meeting is provide you with our budget timeline and what meetings we expect to have presentations with the board. And we'll also be obviously including Finance Committee in those discussions as well. Because of the unique situation of the last 6 months, I think we'll want to have some different conversations than we've had in the past, and we'll want to start those at the next finance meeting so that we can start obtaining your insight and your expectations as we build this process. We want to make sure that we're meeting your needs, but also keeping in mind that with things looking very different, the budgeting process may need to change and modify a little bit as well. So we'll have that discussion at the next finance meeting, and we'll be sure to highlight and emphasize, as well as emphasize some upcoming due dates and timelines, keeping in mind that since this is a presidential election, I'm sorry, no, last year was the presidential election year. We had due dates earlier in the spring. So this year we have later due dates, and we've already begun looking at what we expect your board meeting dates to look like in the new year. So we'll try to match those up as closely as we can with our budget cycle so that we don't have to add any extra meetings or change any meeting dates as we go through this process.
Okay.
Donna, did I forget anything else?
No, thank you, Randy.
Thanks, Donna.
Okay. Any questions? Okay. All right. Thank you, Randy. Then moving on to board committee reports. Dan, do you want to give a report on culture, climate, and learning?
Yeah.
I love that items we covered here.
Yeah, we addressed most of it. There was a presentation that Dr. O'Donnell performed in terms of the means by which the Health and Safety Committee was making decisions regarding the education model to be used, whether it was going to be remote or hybrid or whatever. And it really gave some specifics regarding in the sense the behind the scenes decision making that is taking place, and it really helped a lot to flesh out the manner in which those decisions were being made. And I think since then, and I'll just throw this in incidentally, I think the effort has been to move the decision to Thursdays rather than Friday, which helps families plan for the following week. But it was between that plus a discussion about disproportionate incidents of discipline for kids of color in special education, and we talked about the issues regarding the things we discussed with Sharia about the equity audit was also part of the agenda.
Okay. So Scott's not here for the finance and audit discussion. Jim, do you want to go over what it was primarily the information that Randy went over this evening with us, as well as we had a bit of a review of where we are with the solar power purchasing agreement and looking at revisiting that in a few months. Is there anything you'd want to add with that, Jim or Laurel?
No, not really. I defer to Laurel because I missed about half of it because
I came in late too.
Okay.
I'm not even on the committee though, so.
For finance, yes.
Oh, finance. I'm sorry. I thought we were talking because of the solar. I was confused with the facilities. Sorry.
Oh, I think that was on both agendas. Okay, we'll move on to facilities. Gretchen?
Yeah, hi. Sorry, I don't have video, internet issues. I already mentioned Peter Buck and his students and the greenhouse gas inventory they started, and they gave a report on that. And Jason Little went over two concrete issues, and it sounds like that will be determined at a later date, but if you're not on the facilities committee, I would look at the agenda item on the concrete at Radio Park. And that was it. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Gretchen. So looking forward towards the next scheduled committee meeting is Finance and Audit on the 14th. So at this time on the agenda, we have time for public comment. If anyone would like to make a comment, and each individual will be limited to comments of up to 2 minutes as time permits for items on our agendas or related to board business. Ari, I see your hand raised. And Ari, oh, she went, is she still there? Hi, Ari.
Hi, I'm here.
And if you'd like to introduce yourself, and then you'll have 2 minutes.
Okay, awesome. I'm Ari, and I reside from Harris Township. And as a self-designated spokesperson for the special needs community, I wanted to acknowledge and express our gratitude for your efforts to keep us safe while remaining sensitive to our needs through this difficult time. I'm certain that I don't just speak just for myself. Many of us with special needs appreciate you for facilitating our hybrid school experience, even in times of remote-only learning for the rest of the school. Thanks to the entire ISC staff for their thoughtful efforts and hard work. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Ari. Would anyone else like to make a public comment who's among the attendees? Okay. Then with that, looking towards future agenda planning, our next full board meeting is October 19th. And you can see we have a handful of action items that are slated there, as well as I would think the equity audit as well would be on as an action item. So with that, if anyone would like to make a motion to adjourn. Oh, I'm sorry, Laurel, I see your hand raised.
Yeah, there were 3 items I had noticed that had been previously scheduled. One of them is now again on the action items for next time, which is the modifications to the calendar. The other one was mentioned already is the bond update, and the other was the foundation annual report.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure we need to make the calendar modifications. I don't know why that's on there. I'll talk to Amber and Amy about that. I know Scott had her weighed in. I'm not sure we need to.
Okay, I just had it already on my list of the 3 things when I had looked back over recent things, so that's why.
I think that was left over related to the day that we had off. The board voted to not hold school while we evaluated the COVID numbers. And then that we would be using that snow day in December, but I think Scott had our sense of it, if I'm correct, was that we wouldn't need to vote to do that because it's sort of built into the calendar.
That's right.
Okay. And then in regard to the foundation report, I'm not sure if that might go to finance initially.
We are
It
expecting.
had been on the board agenda, that's why I mentioned it.
Yes, it's expected to come to finance at the next finance meeting, and then yes, it will come to the board. And it has been delayed at my request because of the multiple items that have been quite lengthy at board meetings. But we're hoping to take care of all of those take care of that item at both of the next meetings, finance and board.
So the 14th and the 19th.
Correct.
Great. Okay. Anything else related to future agendas? Okay. Would anyone like to make a motion to adjourn?
Duffy, so moved.
Leah, second.
Sydney, second.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. All in favor of adjourning? Aye.
Aye.
Is anyone opposed? Okay, then we are adjourned.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.